But I want to begin by asking you, how important would you say, the truth is? The truth as it's commonly known, not necessarily how, when we say the truth, it's a parlance of how we identify our faith system, but the truth, being truthful, how important would you say that is?
Being truthful is important, especially if a person says that they follow, honor their Creator God, because God is truth and He cannot lie, and so we are to imitate Him, and as we grow to be more like Him. So, truth is a reflection of our Maker if we walk in, and that's why Scripture says we should walk in the light.
Correct. Agreed. I agree. I'm glad to hear you say that. Another thing that I've noticed since you've been on the scene and in the community and among the people, there's been a lot of discussions or debates and the like, and a lot of these new terms that I have been familiar with, and I'm really glad to see other people becoming familiar with. So we hear it very often in these exchanges and discourses, but they're logical fallacies. Right, that we've heard a lot of these terms being thrown around. We'll probably hear them thrown around in this conversation as well. Arguably, the four major logical fallacies that we may come into contact with tonight as we discuss your book are ad hominems, a false premise, appeal to emotion, and the straw man. So for the benefit of the listening audience, can you briefly bring us up to speed on what those fallacies look like?
An ad hominem literally means attack against the man, so it's against the person, not actually the argument that's been given. A false premise means that the underlying axiom is false in itself. Sometimes if a person asks a question with a false premise, you might hear someone say that's a loaded question. Appeal to emotion is where the argument is appealing to, say, something like sympathy or something like that, not necessarily being a logical syllogism. I do not remember the fourth one.
Straw man.
Straw man is where you're arguing against a position that the other opponent does not actually hold. So it's arguing against straw man, not against their actual position.
Thank you for that. A word that you use during the course of your definition is axiom. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that word, but it means a universally recognized truth. It's something that is an accepted truth, and so when you compromise axiom, or you're going to do something with something that's a universally accepted truth, that is what the word axiom means. Just for those who may not be familiar with some of these other words that we don't use in everyday language unless you are, a boring nerd like me. Okay, so thank you very much for that, because it helps us to spring forward, because the rest of us are going to be using terms like that, and that's not necessarily fair to the audience who wasn't expecting to have to do homework. So the other things that I would like for you to define for me, you, as I said, you do have this appellation that you carry of the so-called Christian apologist. You're a self-proclaimed Christian apologist. But more than that, you assign yourself as a urban apologist. And so I would like for you to share with us what it means, what it means to preface the apologia with urban. What does urban mean as you understand it, or as you are using it?
It means defending and explaining the gospel in a contextual way that relates to specifically the city.
Any city dweller, any city, or does the urban moniker have a particular demographic in mind as far as you understand it?
No, I'll give you an example. So when I walk out my front door, and I would walk to 19th Avenue and Camelback, it would take me about 3.5 minutes to walk there. And if I do it on a Saturday between the hours of 3 and 6 or so, I'll run into Yahushai's servants in Israel, a GMS breakaway sect. And if I speak with them, I'll be speaking with them, and they'll be speaking at everyone going by. and there'll be all kinds of people there because they're getting off the light rail train. So it's literally in the city of it's in the center of the city, and it has to do with anyone who's hearing them. And so that's a certain kind of apologetics. It's not taking place in academic journals between professors back and forth checking each other's footnotes. It's out on the street. But cities are diverse. And so it's not only related to a certain kind of demographic. I understand when people use urban, sometimes there's an old phrase in the 80s, they would say urban radio. What they meant is black radio that plays R&B and hip hop. That's kind of what they would mean by that. So I understand that, but that's not the only folks who live in the city, especially depending on the city.
Okay, I can accept that. That is the truth. That the urban designation doesn't necessarily have to do with a specific demographic. So I was asking, how were you using and how were you applying it, and in your usage of it, and in your function of this kind of urban apology? Are you just talking about being in the city in general? Is that something that would have to be stated because you are a city dweller? It wouldn't be like, I'm confused that perhaps you're in the country or in the water, or you're in Atlantis somewhere. It's pretty going to be clear that you're in the city. So I wanted to just have you articulate for me and for the audience what you are saying when you mean urban. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you want us to accept you using urban as simply the city in general and not a specific demographic. And like you said, because as you stated, it's most commonly understood as speaking to a very specific demographic. But you're saying that it's more expansive than that.
Well, I mean, so the way, you're aware of this. He's mentioned in my book, as an example, the guy who got Hebrew Israelism on my radar was somebody who, if any person in the audience saw walking down the street in plain clothes, would say there's a white guy, or they might say there's an Edomite. They might even say there's a white guy who's probably of Irish descent, or perhaps Nordic descent, because he has what appears to be a red beard. Right. Well, the reason I bring him up is because this is the leader of the GMS Columbus sect that began maybe 10 years ago. They got on my radar about 9 years ago. And they were storming into churches, and it's true, they usually went into what you might call traditionally black churches in traditionally black neighborhoods, but they didn't only go there. But all this action and all this activity was happening in the city. Right.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'll move on to the next thing that I would like for you to define for us and the audience, and that is the word debate. What do you think? What does debate mean as you understand it?
Some form of a discourse between at least two parties who in some way have differing viewpoints.
You said it's a conversation between at least two parties?
At least.
So any conversation, like right now we're having a conversation, is this necessarily a debate?
Oh, no, that's why I brought up the idea that there's some kind of differing viewpoints. To be more specific, the conversation's center of focus in a debate would be on those differences, and so different opposing arguments would be put forward by each party, respective of their beliefs.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to go into asking you a few of the questions with the remaining time. We're at the 10-minute mark. In the intro on page 2 of your book, you write that Barry was the launching pad for this project. Do you remember how the Israelites are identified in the movie?
Could you explain what you mean by how they're identified in the movie? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
In the movie, for the 20 seconds that is about Israelites and Barry, how are they identified? What do they call themselves? What are they called? What is the language that's used to introduce these people?
Oh, well, they speak about the Israelites. I think it's longer than 20 seconds, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But the one key thing is they talk about Israel getting lost and Israel getting found. So one key thing that they say is just simply Israelites.
Okay, so from your recollection, they identify themselves and are identified in the movie as simply Israelites. Is that...
Well, they say, can we, as the lost tribe of Israel, at one point, they say that.
The lost tribes of Israel. Okay, so the way they identify themselves, the way they are identified, is as the lost tribes of Israel. Okay, fine. On page 3, you acknowledge that most Israelites consider black Israelites as a slur. And on the same page, but on the same page, and I think even in the same paragraph, you go on to refute this objection, and in some cases even justify the continuance of using it. Interestingly, you ask what sounds like rhetorically if we would prefer to be called Israelite. Now, my question for you is, was this sardonic quip meant to set this ambiance of contention for your reader at the appetizer stage of the book?
Well, I mean, in one way, I'm saying it could be worse. That's one thing I'm saying by that. But the other thing I'm doing is try to entertain the reader with a turn of phrase that I haven't seen anyone else use, because I don't think everyone actually would immediately even understand. You'd have to kind of see it because it's in parentheses. Parentheses. So yeah, the book has some of those aspects in it. I don't deny that at all. That's not the substance of my arguments, though.
Well, can you be specific? What aspects do you mean? What are those aspects you're referring to?
You use the word sardonic. There's times where there's what you might describe as something as sardonic writing at points. But what I'm saying is that's not the substance of my arguments.
Okay, so okay. This is what I hear you saying. That although the sardonic tone is there, what you want us to understand is that it isn't the totality of the argument. So you're asking us not to weight it against the presence of this tonality. Am I correct? Am I hearing you correctly?
That's not all I'm saying. The book is not just filled with that. Like, for example, if you watch Keith Thompson, what's it called? Reformed Apologetics or something like that. Keith Thompson's video, I think it's called Debunking the Black Hebrew Israelites, who I've never met him. He never asked me about it when he did the documentary project. He constantly is referring to the folks he's trying to debunk as fake black Jews. That's his constant. I never say any. That's not the way. The book is not just filled with that as a refrain. And that's not the strength of the narrative. I mean, if you go to one of the chapters, I hear you.
I wasn't intending to paint.
That's what I was saying. I was just elaborating. I wasn't saying you said that. I was just elaborating on what I meant.
Okay, fair enough. No, fair enough. That I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain it because, again, we're in the introduction. We're on page 3, and this is what the reader, not just me, but the reader is introduced to is this kind of, this is the tone. We're setting the tone here. This is the ambiance. It's when you invite somebody out to dinner and you set the ambiance and you put things together, and this is what's at the table, this kind of introduction to the people. Because I'm not familiar with the work you just referred to, but is that work also a guide on how to interact with the people that they're speaking to?
Nah, his main goal seems to be to just debunk the claims, is from what I can ascertain in the documentary that he produced.
Right. Now, in your book, you are saying that, and I believe it's even in the introduction, where you say this is not an absolute refutation of the claim. So instead, Correct. It's supposed to be an introduction and a guide. So the way you set the tone, and the onus on you to set a particular tone for the reader as they are receiving the information may be different than the obligation this other person who is not trying to create a guide, who is not trying to do any foundational work so that evangelism can happen or so that encountering other people can happen. You are taking on a very specific role and asking these other people to engage another people group And this is how for me, this is the first thing that I see at the table. This is your first, again, literally the introduction to your work. But I hear you when you say that you don't want it to be weighted against these, I'm assuming you're going to say they're more sporadic kind of things. You get more serious, and I will agree, you get more serious in other spaces. To continue, because I don't have a lot of time in this first portion, but you use quotations, and you state that quotations can be understood, they can denote contention. And you continue, as you said, you're going to continue to put Hebrew Israelites in quotations. So are you saying here that did you choose to frame your guide with this negative energy that you're trying to, from the beginning, create this kind of contention that you necessarily state from the beginning the quotations are supposed to denote?
It says right there on that same page, it says they employ it in a non-standard way. I feel that, honestly, regardless of if a person considers themselves from the lineage of Jacob or not, and however strong they think that argument is, it seems as if they should recognize the world around them. Let's say that would view that as non-standard usage, the way they've come to that realization. So this isn't some like minority position where I'm saying this is non-standard usage. And so that's why it's there.
But this is what you wrote. This is what you're saying now. But what you wrote was not that quotations can indicate non-standard usage. You said
it does say that on page 3, right underneath what you said. It says that.
All right, 2 minutes. But you said that the quotation mark was to denote contention, not to denote non-standard usage. The way you were explaining non-standard
usage. Let's read the entire sentence.
We identify as Hebrew Israelites, and we are using it in a non-standard way, but you using quotes necessarily denotes contention. So I guess my question was, are you deliberately creating this negative energy? Because my question would then have to be, how does 1 Peter that I hear you consistently bring up in this verse doesn't list contention as one of the ways that you...
No. What it means is that the phrase is under contest. It means the phrase is a contested phrase, meaning they are claiming this, but it's not granted that that's a reality. Like if somebody from Afghanistan says, I'm an Afghan, nobody denies that he's an Afghan. But if somebody says, I watched a video on YouTube and I woke up to the truth, I'm a Hebrew Israelite, that's a contentious self-designation. I mean, that part of the book it seems like it's stating a fact. I'm not setting up something. Do you deny that this is a challenged claim by most corners of the world?
By most corners of the world? I do not deny that there are people that contend against our designation. I don't do that, and I didn't do that in the question. I think that I'm positive that what I asked you was that when you acknowledge that when people put things in quotations, it is necessarily contention. It denotes contention in this way, and that we already saw this sardonic behavior. Now we're seeing this contention, and as we continue, we're going to see more negativity. So I'm asking you if that's something that you did deliberately. And you're saying, and I hear you now kind of trying to shift it away from there to say that I'm misunderstanding what was written.
Yeah, well, what does contentious mean? So defining it. Causing or likely to cause an argument, controversial, giving to arguing or provoking an argument. So that the phrase, the way that it is used, and remember my focus is one Westers, but that is used by most folks who would call themselves Hebrew Israelites, it definitely is controversial, it's disputable, it's debatable, it's open to debate, it's something that is controversial on the face of it. And so I'm not really setting anything up. That's just really a matter of fact. I don't know. I find it perplexing that you don't see that there. I'm just stating the way things are. I'm not saying this is I don't really understand what you're saying by creating negative energy by writing the word contentious. I don't really understand what you mean by that.
We'll open up your phone line. Let me set up the timer. And Emunah, get with your questions.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Vocab. How are you today?
Hey, Emunah. How you doing?
I'm good. Okay, I have just a few questions. As a self-proclaimed Christian and urban theologian, what role did primary sources play in the writing of your first book? If I'm not mistaken, your first book, quote, Barack Obama versus Black Hebrew Israelites, unquote. What role did primary sources play in writing that book?
Yes, this is my first book, and a majority of what I tried to use was from primary sources. At least half, maybe you could say half is from primary sources. Okay,
thank you for that. The very opening of the chapter, 1981, when you quote, or you set the stage and talking about Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, Snake Eyes, and Cobra Commander, are those fictional or non-fictional characters?
Those are fictional.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're aware, but it has been noted by Time magazine and other media outlets that the movie Barry is a fictional retelling of Barack Obama's young life. Would you agree with that it's a fictional retelling?
It's what you might call historical fiction. It has elements of a biopic pick to it. So It's not completely, to describe it as, if they're saying completely fictional, that's incorrect. If they mean it has fictional or invented elements, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, so we can agree with that. Okay, in your recollection of the movie, how many times was young Obama referred to or self-identified as Barack?
I do not know.
Okay, so basically the movie was named Barry. The majority of the people in the movie called him Barry. That's kind of what I was getting at. Who they were looking at is that not Barack Obama, the president, but Barry, the 21-year-old or the 20-year-old. Would you agree with that?
I mean, both those designations have the same referent, so it's the same person involved. But if you're saying the name he was called at the time by his friends was Barry, that is correct.
Okay, so thank you for that. I'm going to continue. The movie name, which is Barry, the script, the critics, and everyone who's aware of the movie is speaking about young Barry, right, who is not, because when you say Barack Obama, the picture that comes to the majority of people's mind is the president, right? But when you say Barry, that's taking you to a different space and time. It's kind of like when you say Abram versus Abraham, right? So depending on what he's being called is going to determine the imagery that people are going to bring to their mind. And so just stick with me as I ask this question. If this is the case, would you agree that depending on what he's being called, that's the image that's going to come to the minds of the people?
Yeah, there's definitely some truth to that. That's why, for example, if I said Barack Hussein Obama or something, that would have different connotations, I guess.
Right. And so since the movie was called Barry and it's looking at the life of Barry and everyone is calling him Barry, why then choose to use the movie as a launching pad but then put Barack Obama in the title of your book, which gives a totally different image in the mind of the people who are going to see the title?
Well, his name was still Barack Obama, and it was his friends who called him Barry. It's not as if professors at Columbia are saying, is Barry present? Or Barry, here's your grade back.
That's why I asked how many times was he called Barack in the movie. Because
I don't know.
Okay, no problem. But I'm going to continue. And you already spoke on a debate. So you qualified what happened, that exchange. The actual exchange was about 20 seconds. The longer exchange was about 30-something seconds, right? So you call that a debate in some spaces, a mini debate. What exactly happened in that space that you would qualify that as a debate, as opposed to an exchange, a question and answer?
That it was clear that the young Barack Obama, as portrayed, disagreed with the speaker.
Okay, that's okay. You say that it was clear. In your estimation, It was clear. Was there a back and forth, or was there a question, a response, and then the person retreats?
So, from the top of my head, the dialogue is something like this: why that version? Why that version of the Bible? I thought King James was a white devil. Then he points to a picture and says, take a good look right here. Looks like Billy D. Williams, if you ask me. And then the next line is, if you say so, brother, and he walks away.
Okay. And you said that was a debate.
Well, I mean, it's a miniature debate, sure.
Okay. On page 11 of your book, you also speak about, and you wrote about it in different spaces and blogs and different things of that nature, that when you walked up to these what are in your community, when you walked up and you were having this conversation, you didn't, funnily enough, in the book on page 11, you called it a lively back and forth, right? This 1 hour discussion that you're having in your community with the Israelites on the corner, and that was an hour, and you never called it that a debate in your book, then how, you understand what I'm saying? I'm trying to understand how that doesn't qualify as a debate, but a 20 seconds exchange qualifies as a debate.
I mean, it definitely qualifies as a debate. For example, you can look up online where the audio of that aforementioned exchange is, and one of the titles of it is Complete Audio of Black Hebrew Israelites Battle. And then it says Christian Pastor versus Hebrew Israelites. So, I mean...
In your book, you never called it a debate, is what I'm asking. We're discussing the book right now. You never called it a debate in your book.
Yeah, I think I only referred to it one time.
Okay. All right, I'm going to continue. These questions, I'm going somewhere here trying to get where you were coming from and why you would position Barak versus Barry, which all of the movie, because the movie, you keep referencing the movie. The movie calls him Barry. You position it as Barak. There's a 20-second exchange. You position it as a debate. And so my next question is, since Barak is real, right, and you're concerned about the growing movement is real, can you provide the listening audience with some real primary sources that supports the claims that you purport in your book? Meaning, for this debate, this fictionalized debate that, according to you in one of your companion video guides, no one is for sure if this actually happened. How can you base a title and make this be the launching if you have primary sources for the information you want to bring forth? Why chance it with something that you're not sure that actually happened?
Well, it's immediately explained what I mean by the title. So
can you help us out?
If I led people to believe that this is something that we know happened, that'd be one thing. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm immediately from page 1, basically, telling people where this is from, so they understand the context.
But are you clear that it's fictionalized and no one is sure that this encounter actually happened? Because to say Barack Obama versus, people are going to say, let me go on the internet, let me go on the news clips, let me go find out where this is happening. And when you go to the sources, to the media, is there a place that you can point us to where he's on record by saying, hey, I'm against the Hebrew Israelites? Because that's what the title is suggesting.
If a person only saw the title and didn't read page 1, I guess they could assume what you're saying, but they wouldn't have to go on the internet and look because it directly describes where this scene happened in a movie on Netflix.
Come again?
People wouldn't necessarily need to say, hey, let me find out where this happened. They could just go watch the Netflix movie because that's what I'm referring to, which I make clear from page 1. So the only way a person could be confused by that is if they didn't read the book and they only read the title.
But in the book, you continue referring to this biopic, oftentimes fictionalized event. So why do that if this is a real problem? Do you understand what I'm saying? If this is a real problem, why refer to fictionalized events as the guide to addressing your real concerns?
Well, if that's the only time I was quoting Hebrew Israelites, I really think that question might be more salient. But I liberally quote Hebrew Israelites from their own books and from their own videos frequently and often even at length. And so...
but you didn't use that as the lead for your book. It would have made more sense to use that as lead for your book as a part, because I would have one more question and then I'll relinquish the mic. You use Barack Obama. Barack Obama is married to Michelle Obama, correct?
Yeah, I mentioned her in the book as well.
Okay. Did you mention her cousin, Rabbi Funny Capers?
I don't remember if I mentioned him from Chicago, the kind of mainstream guy. I don't remember, but that's a plan in the second edition.
But, okay, what I'm saying is to mention a man's name who's real, wind down south, to mention a man's name who is real, and to create this image that this individual is versus against, and then reference a biopic pic that has a fictionalized event that cannot be substantiated. And this same individual has a wife whose first cousin is very instrumental and is also a quote, as you would say, self-proclaimed Hebrew Israelite, and is very visual. If someone now goes to do the research, we're going to have contrasting views because you use something that cannot be substantiated outside of the Netflix video. Do you understand what I'm saying? Which is causing, if you brought forth all of your primary research, that would have been cool. But when you reached to say, hey, this would be cool, what it did was cause a bit of confusion. And it looks as though your intentions weren't exactly forthcoming with the way in which you approached it. And so that was my line of question. I thank you for your time, and I relinquish the mic.
If the title was James White versus the Hebrew Israelites or something like that, it wouldn't bring any clarity to the issues at hand. And what I do is I show how the things uttered by the presenter in that brief Netflix thing, they're things that other One Westers have actually said, or could say those exact things based upon what they believe. And so, it's shown that there's real life counterparts to the discussion. And it's not as if I'm constantly referring to this little line. I mean, I'm discussing the beliefs. I'm discussing the history. I'm giving people bibliography of even Hebrew Israelite books to read to understand Hebrew Israelism better, of all different types and stripes. I'm giving people links to news articles. I mean, it's rather extensive what I'm outsourcing. The main thing I'm outsourcing for people to go check out further is not the Netflix movie. I say that's a launching pad, and that's really all it is. It's really not the substance of what's going on there. What it is a catchy title that works to shed light on a mysterious issue for most people.
So let's go to the next panelist. We're going to go to Onleilove. Again, it's going to be 12 minutes each. We'll open up her phone line. Then we set the timer. And, hold on. Now you can go ahead.
Good night, everyone. This is Onleilove Chica. And Vocab, I'm offering these questions as someone who is formally theologically trained and from 14 years old was very engaged as an evangelical Christian leader. When I was a Christian, I really loved apologetics such as Ravi Zacharias, who I still have a deep respect for, and people like Hank Hanegraaff, the Bible answer man. So I think apologetics is something to take extremely seriously. I'm also a political organizer, and so I want to just quickly continue the question that Emunah lifted up, because as people of faith, if we're doing so-called ministry, we need to be careful that we have a lot of integrity with what we do. Kind of your title to readers is going to place former President Barack Obama in this false fight of him versus the Hebrew Israelites. And I know you're saying it's a catchy title. I'm a published author. I know the whole book industry, but I actually worship with Chief Rabbi Phony Capers, who is Michelle Obama's cousin, and the Chief Rabbi for the Board of Israelite Rabbis, the largest organized group of Israelite rabbis in the world. And I also sat on boards with President Obama's former faith advisor. And so I wanted to ask, were you aware that during Hanukkah 2012 that Obama actually had the Board of Israelite Rabbis at the White House, as confirmed on blackjews.org under the article Israelites at the White House? Were you aware of that gathering?
Yeah, I've seen the pictures of I think them shaking hands.
Yes, I think, to be honest, that the title is very misleading. Barack Obama became a Christian at Trinity UCC, which is a church that is unapologetically Black, unapologetically Christian. I'm actually friends with the youth minister, and they just finished a series on the Black presence in the Bible where they assert that the Hebrews in the Bible were Black, and that was done under Reverend Otis Moss III, associate of mine. And so, again, I have to go back to this title because President Obama has a lot of emotion for many African Americans as the first president who is partially African American. And so it appears that there was some kind of emotions that you were trying to pull at with this book. And so in light of actually knowing that Obama invited Israelites to break bread with him in the White House, do you think that your title is appropriate, or do you think that it could be read as misleading?
If a person only read the title, I would say so. But if the scene didn't exist in a movie, I would not have that title to the book. It would be a different title. But since the scene exists in a movie, I'm referring to that scene. So that's the reason why it exists. If that movie didn't exist, the book's title would be different than what it is, because there would be nothing to draw.
Yeah, so I didn't see the movie, but I did read your book, and even Obama asking, why are you using King James, doesn't necessarily mean it's him versus the Hebrew Israelites. So I won't belabor that point, but I did want to move on to another question, if that's okay. Just
Correct.
For the audience, can you describe your particular faith tradition? We know you're Christian, but do you consider yourself evangelical, neo-Calvinist, Reformed? Like, what branch of Christianity are you coming out of?
All three of those things you just said, I would be able to sign on to, as long as I could, of course, properly define them. Evangelical, neo-Calvinist, Reformed. Okay,
that's great to know. So are you aware that in certain branches of Calvinism, there is a confluence with Calvinism and British Israelitism? Are you aware of that?
I have never seen that claim nor documentation about it, but I know that it would be irrelevant to my understanding of Reformed theology, as Reformed theology focuses on other questions. But I've never heard or met a British Israelite proponent who was also a Calvinist. Do you know of any that exist?
Yes, I do, and actually had a friend who works for a law firm, and there was litigation around particular Calvinist minister being connected to a white supremacist group. Can't really go into that for legal reasons, but I actually spent some time in Calvinism when I was a Christian and heard things like, it was God's will for Africans to go into slavery so they could get to know him, get to know God. So you should look into the building of America and some of the Calvinist theology that led to instances like slavery. But you do actually mention in your book the sin of racism. And I wanted to just ask you, what role has unchecked racism and white supremacy in the church played in Black Christians and other Christians of color leaving the institutional church? Like, as someone who worships at an Arabic church, there's been a spike of anti-Middle Eastern and Arabic racism coming from certain white Christians due to terrorism, etc. So what role do you think racism has in the rise of Hebrew Israelites?
That's a good question, and I do think that it's definitely played a role. I mean, you go back and you look at the founding of the AME Zion with Richard Allen, because he's pulled up in the middle of worshiping at an altar, basically, in a section which deacons then said, "No, not here." And you have account after account of that. Frederick Douglass secretly leading Bible studies. I mean, the list is long, and you have educators such as Daniel Payne being forced to shut down institutions where they were training young Christian men and women because of laws that would be enacted in states that would no longer allow the education of anyone of African descent. And so his school would get shut down. Just things like that have happened in the United States of America in formal ways, and now sometimes still happen in sort of less formal ways. And so I don't deny at all for a second that overt and covert racism, bigotry, hatred, prejudice has played a part in a rise of not just Hebrew Israelism, but alternatives to Christianity. I don't deny that at all. That is definitely true.
And so with that, since you consider yourself a part of the Reformed and Calvinist camps, do you agree with the statement that it was God's will for slavery to happen so that African people could become Christians?
Well,
as
the problem I have
more
in
than
that
one Calvinist assert.
Right. The problem I have with that sentence is the "so that." So as a Reformed person, there is nothing which happens that God has not ordained. So as I'm saying this, everyone on Shield Squad does not agree. They're not all deterministic as I am, but it's not slavery so that. It's whatever has happened is under God's control and sovereign plan. The "so that," where you're going to begin explaining it or almost justifying it, I'm not in that business. But I am in the business of affirming a sovereign God who sits in the heaven, the Bible says, and does what he pleases, and nobody can stop him or ask him, what are you doing, according to the prophets and the whole testimony of Scripture.
And so thank you for answering that question. Just one item that really needs to be corrected in your book, because it has to do with someone who passed away about 2 years ago this month, is you have my friend Mahalia Goodman's book. She's the author of Israel's Secret Cult. It's on page 132. When you do the overview of Hebrew books, you have her book, Israel's Secret Cult, Incredible Story of a Former Member of the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. On page 132, you have it listed under books written by people who are former Hebrew Israelites. So Mahalia was a friend of mine. She invited me to Israel for a conference that I keynoted. I knew her kids. She died 2 years ago, December 2015. She was a Hebrew to the day she died. She left the Hebrew Israelites of Emunah, which she outlines why in her book, but she never left the Hebrew movement. So if you can think of like a person leaving a Baptist church to become Methodist, or leaving a Christian denominational church to be non-denominational. So if you can move her book to another section, because that's also misleading and it could be hurtful to her friends and family who have been left behind.
I'm, of course, open to that. I guess, do you have any suggestions about what section she would go under? Because, she's got a pretty provocative title, Israel's Secret Cult, The Incredible Story.
But that was of that particular group. I supported that book and the work she did, but she was a Hebrew until she died. So I can look at your book again and maybe on a different platform say where else it should go if you want to highlight it, but it's misleading to say former Hebrew Israelite. So my time is up. So thank you for answering the question, and I'll just go back on mute.
All right, before we go on to the next panelist, you can answer, Vocab.
That's the kind of information that I was really hoping would come out of this. I'm not saying the questions prior have been bad or anything like that, and I'm not saying that people should only say one kind of thing, but I look forward to those kind of corrections. I agree with that, appreciate that. I'm not interested in a fake version of events. But I think most people could understand why, when a book says Israel's Secret Cult, The Incredible Story of a Former Member, I think most people could understand why. And as you read the book, unless there's something I missed, I haven't found anything yet, and it's totally possible I missed it, that makes it clear that she would still be a Hebrew Israelite in some way. However, I'm not doubting what Onleilove is saying, so I appreciate that. But the hope is that there is a second edition and things like that are fixed, because that's an imprecise categorization based on what she said. So I appreciate that.
But let's go to Ron Divine Prospect. He is here, right here on Debate Talk Radio. Let me open up his phone line, and you can begin questions. Go ahead.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you for the opportunity to ask these questions on this panel style Showtime. And I want to give shout out to Mayana also for co-hosting as well. I want to give a shout out to Vocab for being brave enough to answer these critical questions that's being asked of him. I think the sisters did an excellent job. I think if I finish early, I'm going to yield some of my time to them because they had more critically crunching questions to ask Vocab. So, Vocab, are you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So I read your book cover to cover, and I absorbed a lot of information. One main reason why I agreed to do this question and answer segment with you as well is because you mentioned my name in the book as well as my organization. So therefore, that entitles me to at least inquire a little bit more in depth as to why that occurred, as well as several other things that you had mentioned in that book. But before I get into that, the first question I want to ask you that's going to lead into my premise is you identify as a Calvinist, correct?
Yes, I do.
All right. Do you believe that Calvinists are strict adherents to the gospel?
The Calvinism, properly defined, strictly adheres to the gospel. Any given self-described Calvinist may or may not.
Excellent, and I'm glad you answered that way. So just keep that in mind when we talk about Hebrew Israelism, a phrase that not only you have coined, but others have coined as well, and various adherents to that particular tenet of faith also have maybe a similar perspective in regards to how you would label a Hebrew Israelite as opposed to Hebrew Israelism, all right? The reason why I asked that, are you familiar with Jonathan Edwards?
Yes.
Okay. Was Jonathan Edwards a Calvinist?
Yes, he was.
All right. Would you say he was an upstanding Calvinist to the best of his ability from what you know?
I think where you're going to go is you're going to talk about his views and actions in relations to race.
I just asked you to answer the question. Can you answer the question, please?
The thing is, Ron Shields, this is about the book, and you're asking me a question that has nothing to do with the book. Please ask questions about the book.
All right. And can you not identify me as that and keep my name that is actually listed on the flyer? I'd appreciate that, okay?
Yes, I will.
So
now on, I will do
yes,
that.
no question. So if you decline, just say you decline.
I can say, listen, Divine Prospect, I can answer how I want.
Let's continue the process.
But I decline to answer.
I'm just asking if you decline the question, then just say decline. That's what I'm saying. So I can move.
Yeah, let's continue. All right, guys. We got an audience listening. Let's continue.
It's obvious I decline by my answer.
Okay, no problem. All right.
Let's continue.
So moving forward. All right, gotcha. So moving forward, you identify as a Christian presuppositionalist, correct?
Again, this is not in the book.
Let me ask the question. It is yes or no, and I'll tell you how it relates to the book.
I'm just calling attention to it. I don't mind answering it because yes, I do. But again,
okay. So let me move forward. So as a Christian presuppositionalist, right? If somebody was to read your book, if they were looking for objective information in regards to the Hebrew Israelite movement, do you believe that they would automatically be able to detect biasness in how you present the information in your book?
Okay. The aspect of presuppositionalism has nothing to do with your follow-up question, so I do not understand why you use that antecedent. However, I think it's clear as a Christian apologist from even the back of the book that I disagree with the basic tenets of Hebrew Israelism. So, yes, they would be able to determine that I am biased against the claims of Hebrew Israelism from jump in the sense of I do not think a lot of them are true, although there is a section of the book where I talk about 10 things Hebrew Israelites get right.
Yes, I read that, and I also saw the video you did with a friend of mine when you went back and forth with him, Alfredo, in regards to that particular discussion, all right? The reason why I'm asking this is because when we read your book, you have a section called The Story Behind This Book, right? And you were talking about the Hebrew Israelites appeared on my radar a decade ago. So would you admit that your initial contact with the Hebrew Israelites was negative and not positive?
Yes.
All right, so if your encounter with a Hebrew Israelite group who was not as extreme as the ones that you had purported to have met on the street, do you believe that you would have a different premise in regards to writing this book?
I don't appreciate the dubious language you're assigning when you said reported or purported to have met. I don't know why you feel the need to say purported to have met, so I'm calling everyone's attention to that because it's slick language, and I don't appreciate those kind of loaded questions. But if it would have been different, I don't think so, because as I surveyed the landscape, I would have seen the reality of the matter, such as meeting people like you who claim to be moderates but really have a lot of the same beliefs at the core. You just dress it up with prettier clothes.
Now, you didn't have to say that either, because that's being slipped as well. So let's stay to me asking the question.
Let's keep it on topic in regards to the book. In regards to
yes, thank you. So you taking a jab is unnecessary. So I'm making a reference to your book, and in your book you were speaking about your initial contact with adherents to what you coined Hebrew Israelism. So the question that I asked you was very simple. I said, if your experience with encountering an adherent to a Hebrew Israelite faith was a positive one, would that have affected your book in a different light? And
so
it leads us to my next question, because there's another page on there that I want to refer to. But go ahead.
My answer is essentially the same, which is I don't think so, because as I surveyed the landscape, I would see the reality of the situation, regardless of any initial encounters.
So if you were to pick one of the Hebrew Israelite groups that you would favor as being the best representative of Hebrew Israelism, which one would it be?
Well, remember, my book is about One West. So the best representative of One West Hebrew Israelism is clearly ISUPK. They hold the torch, and all the other camps have felt free to deviate much more than they have. But if you mean Hebrew Israelism proper, which is not really the subject of my book, it's in the subtitle, it's about One West, then if you mean best representative, as in who is the best ambassadors to the larger world, I would probably say the Israel of God, because I've had multiple positive experiences with them, again, which I mention as a compare and contrast in my book.
All right. So the reason why I bring it up, because you also just mentioned the compare and contrast. You said your book is about One West Hebrew Israelites. That is false, right? Because you have a list in there. Let me finish. Let me finish. You have a list in there of other non-One West Hebrew Israelites, and you also term some Tanakh-only camps, and you also term some Messianic or Messianic roots groups. So you also mention other groups in there besides One West. So that will give somebody false presumption that even though that let me finish. Vocab.
You got the whole show.
You allowed us to speak and lay out their premise. Let me do the same, please. Thank you. So the reason why I'm saying that is because it is not only about One West. It is mainly about One West as a spring dive into the rest of Hebrew Israelism, because you also mentioned the term Hebrew Israelites, quote unquote, not just Black Hebrew Israelites as well. So the reason why I asked you that is because out of the groups that you actually have listed here, and I can read them for you for the audience, I was asking, of all the groups that you've listed in your book, which ones would be the best representative to you of the Hebrew Israelism paradigm? And I'm assuming you mean IOG. IOG would be the one you would pick, correct?
Yes, I already answered that question, yes.
Okay, cool. All right. So the biggest issue, one of the main issues that I read from your book is in regard to the claim that certain so-called African Americans, Negroes, blacks in America are under the false assumption that they are Hebrew Israelites by blood. Is that correct?
There's no sentence in the book that says what you just said.
No, I'm asking you overall. I'm not saying I'm quoting per se from your book. I'm saying as somebody that's reading it, this is the premise that I'm led to. So I'm asking you, for your own perspective in regards to writing this book, is one of the main issues that you have with the Hebrew Israelite community is the claim to being bloodline Israel?
No, and the book is not a refutation of that claim, which I mention. The book is an introduction to the general beliefs of One West Hebrew Israelites. That's exactly what it is. It's not about contending for that. Otherwise, the whole book would be filled with the refutations for that. I don't have any DNA information in there. I don't interact with every scripture that One Westers use for that claim. That's because that's not the intent of the book. It's an introduction for somebody who has no idea what is going on and yet sees this in their community. And from the feedback I've got, people have utilized it exactly in that way.
All right, and that can be misleading. So I'm going to ask you another question, because since I'm running out of time, I didn't even get to the other 40 questions that I had. But the question I want to ask is, as it pertains to the non-One West Hebrew Israelites, Was there a reason in particular why you added that section if the point of the book was to address the One West camps?
Yes. So people know
what that was?
So people will know those groups are not One Westers, because what happens is people hear, oh, Israel of God, and this happens frequently. They'll assume they're in a real way connected to the folks they see out on the street. Whereas if you talk to Israel of God, they say, we don't get down with those guys who preach hate. We're not on that hate doctrine. Those brothers are lost. They say stuff like that. So the only way so people can know that is when it's listed, they're not One Westers. I'm still using them under the description, not One West. That way people understand, oh, so these are not One Westers. The book is not about them. And if you notice, that's on page 22. Besides Israel of God, I don't even talk really anymore about any of those groups except for Israel of God, so I can do compare and contrast.
Yeah, because you talk about pneumatology and other things that you have issues with them on. All right. So you have in your book, it says the main venues, quote-unquote, Hebrew Israelites proselytize are city blocks. The average Hebrew Israelite annoy your neighbor starter kit includes a mic, a platform, a few offensive poster boards, a tattered KJV, a red apocrypha, and a busy street corner. Now, when you made that statement there, that list that you also had there about other non-One West groups also has the quotes Hebrew Israelites. Do you see that as being misleading in any way?
I'm confused what you're saying. It's clear. First of all, I think that's a great sentence. But second of all, it's clear this is about One Westers. What do you mean?
But now let's go back to Mayana with the interview process, which is going to be 10 minutes. Let me open up Mayana's phone line. Let me set up the timer and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and make a good use of my final 10 minutes. The reason I began at the beginning with these definitions and making sure we were on the same page when it came to how we understood different phrases, one of the things you stated, because Emunah picked up on it, and she asked you about the fact that this is a fictionalized version. And although you are kind of stepping away from the fact that you stated that this is the launching pad, you're saying, oh, I just used that there. You do, to some degree, concede that it was gimmicky. But I think that you're not really taking responsibility for the fact that this is fictional. And the reason why I'm saying that is that there are actual memoirs. They were penned. But so we asked you about primary resources. I asked you at the beginning, how important is the truth to you? And so with all of these actual primary resources at hand, and this is something that you jeer the community about in your book, oh, they didn't know what a primary resource was. And so when we ask you to how wedded were you to this idea of everything must be a primary resource, then with memoirs available to you, you did not use any of them. And then also, and I'm asking you, I'm leading up to, I'm making factual statements.
I disagree with what you just said, just for the record.
Let's recap what I actually said. I said that Barry is a fictional version, and it's what you chose to use, and that Barack Obama has actual memoirs that you could have chosen from. Which one of these statements do you disagree with?
Well, you said... my understanding of what you're saying is I wasn't utilizing primary resources in the book. That's not what you were saying. You're just only referring to Obama. So I misunderstood you.
Right now, I'm talking about your usage. We're talking right now about your title, because this is what you're bringing things. Everyone, like you said, no one's going to have read the entire book before they purchase it. What they're going to read is the title, and I also stated that you admitted this is to some degree gimmicky, because you know that there's going to be this appeal to emotion by the people who are seeing this. The people are going to connect this title with Barack Obama and whatever feelings they have about him, and this idea that the president, I think that you mentioned someone earlier, and somehow that could have been James White, who's nobody in comparison to the president of the United States, and then there's this James White person. I don't even think how he won't have the same appeal as the president of the United States, I would venture to say. So when you put the president's name on the title, you're necessarily eliciting very specific emotions and reactions by doing that. So when Emunah says to you, Barry is a fictional account where you did have access to the actual memoir. In fact, you mentioned the Wayback Machine, which is a facility, is one of the functions of the internetarchives.org. This book, the book of Dreams of My Father, the actual memoir by the man was there. Rather than picking out your friend's article or whomever's article you were choosing, you could have had Barry's actual words as the President Barack there. So, but I was recapping when I made that point. What I wanted to say that is, we have another movie that you later mentioned, 999. Let me see if I can find it. Right. So 999 has a similar scene with Woody Harrelson, which you point out. And unlike the fictional character in Barry and the movie actors in it, who are relatively new actors, we have A-list actors in this other 40 seconds. This was like 40 seconds of Israelites being featured in this movie, and so you could have just as easily called it Woody Harrelson versus the Hebrew Israelites if that is what you were trying to do in terms of I just want to bring in a movie title because you made this argument that it's a Netflix thing and this is what I said. I mean, we have Casey Affleck, we have Woody Harrelson, we have Kate Winslet, we have Gal Gadot, who later goes on to play Wonder Woman. I mean, if you wanted to call down real star power, you could have used 999. Why use Barack Obama, if not to elicit this appeal to emotion?
So you're saying that I should have, it would have been better if I titled the book Woody Harrelson versus the Black Hebrew Israelites? Well, first of all, I'm saying that this is an appeal to emotion. Why did you choose a route that is an appeal to emotion, which you established in the beginning was logical fallacy? Why would you do that instead? Because you could have, like I'm saying, you could have very easily used Woody Harrelson. I'm showing you something. I'm asking you, why did you do that? If you just wanted to use a gimmicky name, the star power behind 999 would make more sense in terms of star power and if that's all you were looking for. But unless you were trying to elicit a logical fallacy, it's appeal to emotion, which will be different with Barack Obama. Barack Obama is going to have a different reaction specifically within a specific demographic, which you didn't want to acknowledge in the beginning when we discussed urban. But throughout the whole text, we're not talking about everybody in the city. There's a very specific demographic you are appealing to. Your title elicits a very specific reaction in a very particular demographic. So you could have used Woody Harrelson versus the Hebrew Israelites using the same logic unless you were trying to do an appeal to emotion. So I'm asking you to clarify for me and the listening audience what your intentions were. So, again, this literally is not really about the book. It's about the title of the book and about a title of the book that I did not choose. I really wish we could get into page numbers and details of the book. What page number or where you're talking about? Okay. I don't see how you don't understand this is about the book. No, book from the beginning. Okay, I'll clarify. From the beginning.
Let her answer. Let him answer.
I don't want you to feel like this is not connected to the book. It's connected to the book because we're trying to establish intention. We're trying to establish tonality. We're trying to establish objective. And so we're showing you, I'm trying to show you that there's a very specific direction that the book has that is necessarily slanted from the beginning. Now, we can go into that. I can show you other things. And I'll move on. If you want to feel like there's something specific you want me to address, I do have other very specific concerns with this material. For example,
give him a chance to answer that. Give him a chance to answer.
The back of the book says, this book primarily outlines the essential history and beliefs of One West Hebrew Israelism. My intent in the book was to outline the essential history and beliefs of One West Hebrew Israelism. That was the intent of the book.
All right, Alex, I hear your answer. So again, you maintain that the book is talking about primarily One West. Okay, let's deal with your stated position. When we look at, for example, when you want to make the comparison between IOG, who you say is the better of the worst, I guess you would claim it to be, but the people that you actually compare IOG with is not ISUPK, it's GMS. When you go to make this comparison, you repeatedly go to GMS.
Why?
you go to? Okay, yes, I would love to know why you go to GMS instead of.
Let me tell you why. So some people sometimes have talked about, Vocab watches YouTube videos. That's really one of the last things I do when it comes to Hebrew Israelism. The two main groups that I've had the most personal, face-to-face encounter and exposure to are GMS and Israel of God. Why is that? IUIC will not have a discussion face-to-face. I actually went to the school 2 weeks ago, and I've done other outreaches to try to do it. They will not speak. GOCC will. I've met with GOCC members or people influenced by them locally here in Phoenix. They sometimes will. However, they're hard to find out on the street. GMS, ironically enough, is the most willing to engage with you if you want to talk to them out of any group I've seen as far as One Westers go. So that's the reason I have the most personal contact with them. And then on the other side, probably the second most is Israel of God, because they've reached out to me and shown hospitality several times. And so that's why, because I'm using personal eyewitness account testimony from my own life, or the two main groups I know the best person to person.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll address it the next time I have, because I don't have enough time, right, Sal?
Got 1 minute left.
Okay, so in that 1 minute, so it's still your position that GMS is. Where is One West? What is One West? What is One West?
It's an address in Harlem, New York, 1 West 125th Street, where the ideas congealed and where all the modern schools
of whom? Where, if you went to 1 West 125th Street when they were there, who would you have found?
You would have found REI being the chief high priest.
You would have found ISU. You would have found UPK. You would not have found GMS.
Well, GMS did not exist at that time. There was no GMS.
So you're using a group in lieu of ISUPK because you don't have contact with the ISUPK. No.
One West is where all the camps come out of the original One West. ISUPK, the modern incarnation, which IUIC refers to as a refurbished version, ISUPK has the name, and they're the only ones who are proud of the One West title. But all of the leaders that I'm describing are either were in the school or ideological descendants of those. For example, Sakkari, he was never in the school. He's too young, but he came out of GMS, and he's influenced by One West theology. One time he told me, I'll never be as good at exegete as Ariyah, for example. And so that's what I mean by One West. I'm not referring to the modern ISUPK. I'm referring to back in the day, actually when it was even called ICUPK. I'm referring to that because that's where all the groups that I'm discussing and the groups that you see on the street corner, they come out of One West ideologically, and sometimes they were actually there, so didactically as well.
We're going to go back to Onleilove, who has 12 minutes. Let me open up the phone line, and go ahead.
Okay, shalom. Hi, Vocab. If you turn to page 3, I have a question based on one of your sentences on that page.
Okay,
Divine Prospect started this question. I know you said that this book wasn't dealing with the fact of whether Hebrew Israelites were genetically Hebrew or not. And granted, that's not in the title or the description. But on page 3, this quote kind of led me to think you are taking some knocks at the assertion that they're related to the biblical Hebrews, and a couple of other comments in the book, but we don't have time for me to read all of them. But on page 3, on the last paragraph, you say there are no compelling reasons to believe that most self-identified, quote-unquote, Hebrew Israelites are truly Hebrew or Israelite ethnically, nationally, or religiously. So, that quote kind of sets up on your 3rd page that you are trying to take knocks at the actual ethnic claims of these people being related to the Hebrew Israelites in the Bible. And so I wanted to ask a question related to that, because there's actually many white Jewish groups such as Kalanu, which I actually know the director of, Jewish Voice Ministries, which is a Messianic Jewish group, Sam Kassenbaum, who's a Jewish writer for The Forward, Jeff Lieberman, who's a Jewish director of Reemerging the Jews of Nigeria, Shavai, which is another group. These organizations, directors, and authors all spend time with people in Africa who say they are related to the Hebrews of the Bible. And actually in Judaism, this kind of prophetic hope of all the tribes being regathered is pretty central to their expectation of a Messiah coming. So I wanted to ask, do you think these organizations, individuals, and even the Society for the Study of African Jewry, which are PhD professors who study African Jews, are just wasting their time? Since it appears that you think the kind of assertion that Black people could be Hebrews is not true at all. You just stated that on your third page. So do you think these Jewish scholars and writers are just wasting their time as well with Black communities?
So Sam Kestenbaum is a reporter, so he reports on these things. I'm not sure that it's correct to say he spent times in Africa with these groups. I don't know if that's the case, but I do know it's the
case. You
can
take
that,
them out of the Africa. I know him. He's visited my congregation. But what about the rest of them? Because like
Jewish
has
Voice.
A long.
So let me answer. So Jewish Voice was working with the Igbo until they did the DNA tests.
Yes,
and then
actually,
please let me.
Yes,
if I could.
They didn't cease working with the Igbo. Yeah, you can go on.
I'm trying to finish the sentence, please. So after the DNA testing showed negative results, they ceased from working from them because their goal is to reach out to people who have a legitimate Israelite or Jewish heritage. And so they took it in good faith based upon the Igbo claims, but the science showed differently, and so they respectfully bowed out. But they weren't opposed to it in the beginning. And so
can I just address that before you go on?
Question, which relates to the limba. The answer is I think it's very valid to affirm the limba as the reality matches the claims. So it's not that I don't think anybody who is Black could be ethnically related. That's not my contention at all.
Okay, thank you. So one thing I actually did a conference where I keynoted on African Hebrews with second in command at Jewish Voice, Rabbi Jack Zimmerman, and he didn't debunk anything in my presentation. He actually enjoyed it. Jewish Voice is still going to be working with the Igbos. I also, about 3 weeks ago, was with two of the Igbo rabbis who brought Jewish Voice to Nigeria for the DNA testing, and they shared the whole story. The DNA results were actually inconclusive. The sample size was not big enough. The Limba's DNA, which you can see on the Discovery Channel, was interpreted by an Oxford University geneticist, whereas the Igbo's DNA was interpreted by maybe a year-old Jewish DNA testing company in Arizona. So actually, there's still...
Well, it's a Texas-based company.
Yeah, okay, Texas.
So there's a lot of incorrect information in what you're saying. And again, this has nothing to do with the book because I don't mention genealogy. The closest I do is that one line.
But it's not incorrect because I was actually with the leaders and actually with the second in command of Jewish Voice. So I'm not going to go back and forth on that.
Wait, you're saying you're second in command under Jonathan Bernice? That's what you're telling me?
I said I keynoted a conference with Rabbi Jack Zimmerman, who is second in command at Jewish Voice. And the conference was about African Jews, and we weren't just talking about the Limba and Ethiopians. And I was also with two of the rabbis from Igbo land who brought Jewish Voice there. So it's actually not a lot of incorrections, but since you say this is not about the book, even though it's based on a quote you made in the book, can I just go on to another question for time?
Yes, indeed.
There's a lot, but comparing the Limba DNA, which was read by Oxford, to this 1-year-old testing agency is actually not correct. And there's still many Jewish... That has
nothing to do with my book, though.
Okay,
it literally has nothing to do with it.
It has something to do with that quote, but let's move on. So I wanted to ask another question around what you mentioned concerning the sin of racism in the book. And so just give me a moment. Actually, I'm going to move on from that question. I wanted to ask you about why the focus of your group was One West in particular and not some of the historically Black Jewish synagogues that pre-existed One West? Like, why didn't you focus your book on kind of those most connected to the commanded keepers? Just let me answer my question. Yeah.
There's a lot of books already on this. There are no books on One West. That's why.
Mm-hmm. So do you think it would be fair for a non-Christian to write a book about Westboro Baptist Church?
They already have. They already have done that.
Yeah, but as a summary for what is representative of all Christianity. Because the way this book reads is...
Well, wait, hold on. You just ask me a question. You just ask a question. Unless you're just asking rhetorical questions. The answer is they already have done that numerous times, but that's an apples and oranges comparison because Westboro is under 100 people. One West Hebrew Israelism is growing worldwide. IUIC is up to 5,000 members.
I'm aware of how big IUIC is, and when I was a Christian, I worked with progressive evangelical groups that were trying to combat racism, sexism, classism that was coming out of the conservative evangelical church, including mega churches. Some progressive Christians, some people in, say, the United Church of Christ, would look at the sector of Christianity that you're affiliated with in the same way as some moderate Hebrews, as you call them, look at.
Hold on, Vocab.
You're
let her complete her thought. Let her complete her thought. You got the whole show.
You're interrupting me.
Let her complete her thought. Okay.
What I was saying is, if you took, say, my friend who's head of social justice at the United Church of Christ, the way you look at One West and the way you describe One West would be the way many progressive Christians describe Reformed Christians, Calvinist Christians, very conservative evangelical Christians. And I say that as someone who was very entrenched in those traditions.
The United Church of Christ came into being in 1957 with the union of two Protestant church denominations, the evangelical.
Hold on, please let me.
There should be some interaction because you're more just giving long sentences without any interaction from me. I do not understand how this benefits.
You interrupted me a couple of times too.
Yeah,
I'm not talking
Vocab, basically.
Yeah, there's no question. That's because there's no question.
There is a question, Vocab. The question is, the way you categorize One West Hebrew Israelitism, which is one sector of the movement, is the way many progressive Christians characterize Calvinism, Reformed Christianity, and conservative evangelicalism. I use UCC as an example of a progressive Christian denomination. We could even say organizations like Sojourners, Catholics, more progressive sectors of the church also make claims around the sector of Christianity you come out of. So how do you feel about those claims? And what are you doing to combat issues of racism?
Right. I'm reading from the United Church of Christ website, and it says, what is it? It says the United Church of Christ came to being in 1957 with a union of two Protestant denominations, the Evangelical and Reformed Church, and the Congregational Christian Churches. So, I mean, they describe their origins as Evangelical and Reformed. And now to the question.
Hold on, let him answer.
This is maddening.
Let him answer. Okay.
How is it madness, Vocab?
One at a time, yo. One at a time.
I attend an Arabic church. They are a minority in America. They've been persecuted in the Middle East. They come over here with stories of dead family members. They are not accepted by a lot of the larger culture, not about Christian, but the larger culture of the United States of America. This is the concept. I'm not in some mega church with a bunch of white folks. I'm a persecuted minority in America and really all around the world, Middle East and Arabic-speaking Christians. So you're saying what I come out of, but I am a member at an Arabic church. That's what I'm coming out of. The sin of racism that we have to combat there is to deal with sometimes the over-focus or over-emphasis that sometimes dispensationalists have with supporting Israel no matter what she does, because the Arabic Christians get persecuted and hated on, and they get ignored a lot of times by the larger evangelical world. So that's something that we combat on a regular basis that we have to deal with. We also have to deal with the fact that the second somebody hears Arabic or they see someone who looks Middle Eastern, they'll think all these negative things, but yet here we are believers in Jesus Christ. So that's the kind of things that I'm dealing with, and we're directly dealing with that in our community.
And vocab, I opened my first round of questions with acknowledging that you go to a Baptist Arabic church, but I also asked you what faith tradition of Christianity you came out of, evangelical, neo-Calvinist, Reformed, etc., and you said all three. So when I'm saying your sector of Christianity, I'm not talking about your church, which you haven't always been a member of, but more so the faith tradition. I'm very aware of what Arabic Christians go through. I actually work on that in my professional life. But the question is the wider Christian milieu that you come out of. I'm also aware and know two national bishops in the UCC church who, what was evangelical when they were founded and what is evangelical today has changed enormously. And I know the critiques they give towards certain Christian apologetics, the Gospel Coalition, which is also writing articles about Hebrew Israelites. So you did not need to explain that. I'm sorry for what your people go through, and I'm sorry for what my people go through. But if we're not taking the sin of racism, white supremacy seriously, both of our communities will continue to suffer. So I'm just confused as to why there's an over-focus on Hebrew Israelites, which is still very much small when compared to the American.
Awesome. Well, let's go to the next person on the panel. We're going to go to Ron Devon Prospect. All right, let me open up his phone line. Let me set up the timer, and go ahead.
All right. Thank you for that Showtime, and thank you for Vocab for still being on the line and addressing the questions that we have for you. The question I would like to ask you is, would you classify Hebrew Israelism and adherents to Hebrew Israelism as far as Hebrew Israelites, would you classify them as a cult or a heretical divergent form of Judaism, Christianity?
One West would meet a lot of the classical definitions of a cult. When you ask about the larger framework of Hebrew Israelism, they could just be involved in the same fallacies or heresies or errors as traditional Judaism. So that would not be appropriate, I don't think, to describe, for example, Rabbi Kapers Funyeh as being a member of a cult, for example.
Okay, so Hebrew Israelism in the general term, you're saying that you wouldn't really classify it as a cult. Is that correct?
There are types of Hebrew Israelism that are cultic, such as the One West variety. And I mentioned that in the book, how there are characteristics of cultic groups that One West Hebrew Israelism matches. In Alan Gomes' book, Unmasking the Cults, he lists 19 theological characteristics of cults. About 15 of these are true of One West Hebrew Israelism. 3 of these directly relate to how One Westers mishandle the Word of God. Redefinition of biblical terminology, disregard for sound hermeneutical principles, tendency to see Scripture as alluding to their cultic movement.
Okay, are you done? Because I was going to follow up my question. I was just asking a yes or no so I can lead on to my next question. I'm
sorry, I was trying to get more context. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem, because I was on that same page. I was going in his classic book, Kingdom of Cults, Walter Ralston Martin, which you just termed as Walter Martin. So the reason why I'm asking you that question is, have you done any kind of quantitative research with the heads of One West, particularly in order for you to extract statistical data to come to the conclusions that you made in regards to your book? Because Walter Martin has done that in regards to his classification of dealing with cults and his actual interviews with individuals who are actual leaders in those cults themselves. Have you also performed the same work?
Some of the leadership of some of the One West groups are forthright with me about membership numbers behind the scenes, and then there's other ones who are forthright about numbers in public. The rest are not so forthright. So with some, you can do the numbers. With others, you cannot. And there are aspects of some of these groups who I do speak to privately and give me information and want to share their perspective. So the answer is a qualified yes, but not a total yes, mainly because of some of the closed-off nature of some of the leadership of the One West groups.
Okay, gotcha. So you're saying for the most part you have not spoken to anybody, let's say, for example, the founders of One West that you mentioned a lot. You even spoke about Ariyah. Have you ever spoken to anybody in Ariel's current camp now that the Comforter was the head of. Have you spoke to any of those leaders in any way, shape, or form yourself?
The Israelite Church of God and Jesus Christ, whom you mentioned, are certainly, out of all the closed groups these days anyway, one of the most secretive groups, and aren't really prominent on the ascendancy like they once were. So those conversations with members of those groups have only happened online as far as the ICGJC. And REA is really off limits. Nobody can get to REA, and there's only one other. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I understand, and you're making a great point, but the question I'm asking is, so you can say with certainty that you have not spoken to any leaders that were responsible for founding One West, correct?
Well, there's only a few left. Most of them are dead, so nobody has.
That's all I'm asking you. Have you spoken to them? Have you interviewed them formally? Have you designed a questionnaire to extract information from them directly? I was just asking, have you done that level of research? Because if not, you don't think that you could have waited until you've gotten an opportunity to do so, or somebody that you know could have also conducted that type of questionnaire research before you created a book about the actual group that you're speaking of, and then you cite Walter Martin, who has actually done that, even with certain closed-off groups, before he came out with his dissertations against the cults, more lamely on shows that a lot of us may have watched, like the John Ankerberg show. I'm just saying, I don't think, I think that...
General Mayana... I thought you were done. General Mayana never met Abba Bivens. You know what I'm saying? General Mayana never met Abba Bivens, yet he believes he's carrying on his teaching and speaks about him. The folks you're mentioning, really no one has spoken to some of them. And so what you're saying is actually not an option. But I can tell you what I have done that is an option. I have spoken with the leadership that will speak with me of some of the One West camps. I have done that. The current existing One West camps, I have spoken to some of the leadership who will speak with me. Now, I've spoke at numerous of them. There's numerous times I've reached out to Nate. He knows. I stopped by the school, for example, gave him a book with my cell phone number on it. He has it. I called into a radio show the next day he was on and did a follow-up call on the phone, or I'm sorry, through the comment board, actually, rather. The guy read it over the phone. But so I have try to do this, but some of what you're saying, no one has done because it's not possible.
You mean no one who's a Christian apologist, correct?
No one. No, who has access to REI besides the Comforter?
The people
and who has access to the Comforter?
The people that's in that church. So there's people
right, and
like,
I'm not a member of the ICGC.
No, I hear you. I'm saying there's people in my community that speak to people in that church. So they would have intel and information in regards to what happens. And,
well, I've done that. You asked about the leadership.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying, as far as Christian apologetics, as far as you know, no one has ever come up with the work that you're claiming to have done. And on top of that, no formal questionnaire has been done with any of these leaders in order for you to come to the conclusion in your book. So you're saying it's solely off of the empirical data that you've obtained based on your own personal interactions with adherents or members of these groups, or let's say secondhand, information from people that were in these groups that then relay information to you. So all I'm saying is there was no real primary research done in the formation of this book.
Yeah, that's incorrect, because I've told you numerous times I've talked to members. And so that is a source of primary information. There's no qualification. It has to be leadership. But to up the ante, I have spoken to some leadership of One West camps specifically, personally. So I have done that. And furthermore, primary source also has to do with materials written by adherents. And I reference often materials written by adherents, and have read a bunch more materials written by adherents that I did not include. What you're saying, though, is a ludicrous standard. Walter Martin never sent Mary Baker Eddy a questionnaire that she was going to fill out.
Of course not.
Walter Martin never sent
what I'm saying is,
that he was going to fill out.
Have you? Yes. So what I'm saying is, in regards to what you're just saying, because I'm just trying to understand the foundational basis for your primary research. Are you saying that you've read material written by One West groups? Is that what you're saying?
That's not the only primary source material, but that is
no. But I'm asking, have you read material written by One West groups?
Yes, I have.
Can you cite them for us?
Yeah, Nate, for example, Nathaniel, has 2 books. One which is called Welcome Home, and the other one's an illustrated guide to the Bible. And there's also another One West book on my shelf I can grab. The problem is I'm looking at it, but it's a self-published book, so it doesn't have the title on it. Just a minute. On the side.
No problem.
All right. The Real Hebrew Israelites versus Edom and Khazaria by Tazadak Shah, for example. And that's a pretty lengthy book. So there's one as well as folks who are former members as well, such as Hannah Spivey, who was involved with a number of One West groups.
All right. So the reason why I'm asking this is because there are some people from One West who unfortunately wasn't able to be on the panel to ask certain questions. And this is a concern of theirs to see what type of primary research that you've done to collate the data that you've actually included in your book itself to present to your audience. So this is a concern of theirs, and this is questions that they would ask you if they were on the line. So I appreciate you sharing that, so that way they can get an idea of what's going on. But I think one thing that would be an issue to them or to their dismay is that no primary research has been done in regards to interviewing, renaming material of any of the leaders that you mention in the book.
That's not true. Yeah, so that's not correct, and that's not the only form of primary research that a researcher does. So I'm not really. No, I don't think you understand what primary research means if you're using it in that way, because that's not the only.
But I was making specifics. I wasn't talking about broad. I was saying specifics because these are inquiries that they would have, but unfortunately they're not on the line to ask you these questions. So I'm mostly speaking about the leaders that you said helped to found One West, and I'm saying you have not done any questionnaire interviews with them. You have not read any of their material that they've
specifically.
What do I mean? What do you mean? What do I mean? The people that you just finished saying that are
no, but who? Like, no, what I'm saying is, what are the names of the people you're saying I should have interviewed? Because we're talking about a vague thing. You're saying leadership of One West. Who actually, specifically, literally, do you mean that should have been
the name that you mentioned all the time? Ariyah.
Who else?
Because to you, to you, that's the person that a lot of the doctrines ascribe to until you've done further research and you looked into his teachers and see where he got a lot of his data from. So what I'm saying is, him more particularly, because that's the person that name come up probably the most out of all the founders of One West in your book. And this is the question that those One West groups would want to ask you. They say, if you've never had personal time with him himself, how can you represent his worldview? That would be what they would want to ask you.
You know how many times I mentioned Ariyah in the book? 3.
And when you mention him these 3 times, what is it in reference to?
3 of his students, Ariyah, Moshe, Jacob, that's how it pronounced at the time, began a new school right around the corner at 1 West 20 and 25th Street in Harlem.
You spoke to Jacob?
Now let me read the other one.
Okay, go ahead.
The other one says, with the introduction of Lashwan Kodash, Aryeh changed his name to Ariyah. And then the next one says, meanwhile, the ICUPK suffered a terrible setback when Ariyah predicted and declared frequently and confidently that Christ would come back to kill or enslave all non-Israelites to January 1st, 2000. And there's one under a low-ranking member named Tazadakia, Jermaine Grant, rose to power even over Ariyah. So it looks like there might be 4. I'm doing it through a PDF search. So it looks like there's...
no problem. So those 4 individuals, you have not spoken to any of them, correct? I mean, you can't speak to Mashan because he's not here.
Yaquab is dead.
Naziak and Ariyah.
So Yaquab is dead.
Yeah. So I'm saying that you can only speak to Naziak and Ariyah. So anybody else who you claim to be founders, all I'm saying is you're not able to speak to them personally to get any information from them because, like you said in your book, there's not a lot of material that comes from the community, right? So the only real way to actually understand the founders of One West is to actually speak to anybody or to get somebody that you know personally who has had personal time with them and
All right, unfortunately, time is up, but Vocab, you can answer briefly before we go to the next panelist. Okay.
Yeah, out of modern day One West leadership, they do get quoted. Tazariak gets quoted. Rakar gets quoted. Nathaniel gets quoted. Those are some examples right there. But what Divine Prospect is asking is something that actually very few One-Westers have done themselves for a number of reasons. One is many of the people are dead. When I refer, the founders of the school aren't according to me. They're according to people like General Yohana who know the history. And there's videos you can see where he relays it. And also the 7 heads, that's not something that I invented, but most of them are not available. Now, Lahab is an exception, and I've been working on that for a while. But he has interviews also that are publicly available as well. But what I'm saying is what you're asking is something that hasn't been done by most One-Westers themselves, as well as it's something that I've never seen a Hebrew Israelite do with any Christian group that they speak with. So if that's the kind of standard we're going to use, then I would like to see Divine Prospect begin interviewing leadership of groups with questionnaires before he refers to them. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Let's go to the final panelist. Let's go to Emunah. And she has 12 minutes. Go ahead.
Hopefully I won't take 12 minutes. You have Vocab out here. He's probably sweating. He probably has to rub his brow right now. So this is going to be short. On page 12, the second paragraph, you said that your focus shifted in 2015 when you submitted a proposal for your doctorate. And when you jumped down a little bit, you said you had 2 choices, and you ended up submitting a proposal relating to, I'm quoting, the term that you adopted, Hebrew Israelism. Can you help us to understand a little bit more of what that proposal was? And I've asked you in another space, and just for clarity, is this book an extension of that proposal?
No, this book is something entirely separate. This book was not written in a way that would be made to go through the doctorate process, meaning the book is a lay level introduction or guide, so it's not written for the professors and of that nature. So it's something entirely separate, really, and in fact, it's severely interrupted that work because of the nature of time that it took.
Okay, so when you say that you submitted a proposal relating, and so the amount of book references that you have in the latter portion of this book, the time that you invested in this, you're saying that it had nothing to do with the proposal? And if so, then why, do you understand, why do you have a proposal relating to Hebrew Israelism and spend so much time, energy, money, effort into a space that's not going to yield fruit for you as it relates to your doctorate?
Oh, well, I mean, I've seen lots of feedback. I just spoke to a man from Seattle, Washington today named Jordan, and it has yielded fruit. So it hasn't, of course, yielded fruit in the sense of something I could submit to my professors. However, what it's done is it's definitely equipped me in the research stage to, when I do get to that spot, to have much more facility with handling the materials. I'm not saying it has nothing to do with it, because what it did is it jump-started my research into it, but then it took on a life of its own. So what I mean is, for example, the books I got and all that, a lot of those were done in the initial phase that were supposed to be in relationship to the doctoral project. But what happens is it took on a life of its own. It became for this book, which the book will, it's not able to play a factor in what I turn in, because it's not written according to the standards of a doctoral project outline that you have to adhere to.
So is that why, that clears up why in the beginning of the book you take mention that this is not for dissertation, it wouldn't qualify as a dissertation, and it's unorthodox in the way in which you present this information. Is the reason you're giving now why you felt the need to put that in the book?
I'm trying to make sure.
Concerning what you just said, earlier in your book, I believe it's page 3, if I'm not mistaken. Earlier on in your book, you speak about this work not being suitable for a doctoral project, kind of like what you just said. And so, to understand what you're saying is that the initial intent was towards your doctoral project, and you kind of veered off course into what became this book.
Partially. I mean, what I say on page 4 is this book is not directed at professional academics. It is not designed to conform to all the rules and regulations of a dissertation. That's what I'm saying there. And I talk about how I don't over-engage in academic jargon. But there's some beginning things I begin writing, but it's a totally different file. Maybe this is a way to describe it. The file for the book and the file for my doctoral project are two totally different files because the overlapping material is only in a few places.
Are you able to share with the people the intent behind the doctoral project? Was it going to be similar in the vein in which it's overlapping? In other spaces you had a proposal to counter Black Hebrew Israelites. Was that this book and your doctoral project was something totally different? Was it going to be objective, your doctoral project? Was it going to, you know what I'm saying? Were you going to, what was the way in which that you intended to engage the community? If it's not the same, but a little bit different.
A title was along the lines of this for the doctoral project, Overcoming the Challenge of Hebrew Israelism in the City Churches. Along those lines is what I was working with. And so the blog post you're referring to, some of that in those beginning stages was related to it, but I changed it for a blog post to make more sense in a blog post context. Okay. But yes, some of it. But if you look, that was done a while ago.
Yes, definitely. I see it was done. What's this? This was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. This was some time ago. So definitely things evolved, things changed. But just for clarity, because you made a mention of it in your book, I kind of wanted to have the listening audience as well as myself glean a bit more clarity as to why you felt the need to say this doesn't qualify for a doctoral, but it was in the same vein. As it relates to the subject matter.
Well, yeah, it's a common, not every author does it, but a lot of times an author will explain their intent in the beginning of a book, and they'll also explain their general methodology or approach or who the intended audience is designed for. And so that beginning section is trying to do that.
And lastly, because you mentioned methodology, I'm not going to keep you long. As it relates to methodology, what were some of the ways, besides reading some of the books that were already written and YouTube channels, what were you mentioned in some places like message boards and screenshots and things of that nature, were the people that you were engaging aware that you were going to write a book about them? Or were they was it kind of like, I'm engaging you and then I'm going to write a book about you, but you're not going to know until I write the book about you?
You can't. In academic research, you can't engage in study of a subject when it's an actual person without their knowledge. It violates the ethics and rules of a commission that your work has to pass. So that you can't do what you're saying along those lines. Now, for a book, it doesn't have the same stipulations, but I've made no secret. As soon as I knew what I was going to do my project on, it was announced, and I even had one professor say, hey, it's caused some problems and challenges. Maybe don't be so public with it, because we had a Hebrew Israelite group actually send a letter to the school claiming they were going to sue the school if I went forward with the project. And that happened right in the beginning. So it's been very public. I've said it. It's in the book. So I've never tried to hide that fact when I'm talking to anybody or anything like that. And in a final project, all the information has to be done either with publicly accessible information or something where the person involved has an awareness.
Okay. All right. That's very interesting. Thank you for clearing that up and giving us some understanding about, it being similar but not the same, and how things progressed, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the conversation. Thank you once again.
Only love. We appreciate you for coming out. You have 5 minutes, final words. Go ahead.
Good night, everybody. Just wanted to thank you, Sal and Mayana, again for putting this together. Wanted to thank Vocab for being on. I just finished the book, and I know books are kind of like babies, so it's kind of bringing your baby before people to be critiqued. But thank you for being open to the dialogue. I think that's what being an apologist is all about. I would just say in closing that it's extremely important that we are wise in all of our interactions and that we're very mindful of who's coming in and out of our communities. I think we all need to look within our own faith communities and address those problems and issues that need to be addressed within so that other people don't have room to come from without. I would say that, no one can stop biblical prophecy. So if this is not of the Most High, it will not last. But if it is of the Most High, anyone who tries to stop it or get in the middle of it will be in danger. Their soul will be in danger. And that's not towards one person, but towards anyone. I also think it's extremely important that the sin of racism and white supremacy, which Reverend Jim Wallace calls America's original sin, is dealt with. Whether we're people of color or not, we all have internalized white oppression. And if we can't fathom that God might choose people of African descent for something, we need to examine our hearts. If anyone wants to follow the work I do, focusing on Hebrews in Africa, they can go to propheticwhirlwind.com. I have a book forthcoming that, ironically, is being published by a Christian university-backed press about what I call the Black biblical destiny. And I think we all should be able to give a reason for the hope that we have. So good night, and thank you, everyone, for listening.
All right, once again, Onleilove, we appreciate you coming out under, such conditions, not feeling well. We appreciate you once again. All right, let's go to Emunah. Final words? Go ahead.
No, I look forward to hearing the listening audience. I want to thank our guests for coming in and, sticking through the questions and answering it to the best of their ability. And I thank you for the level of transparency that you've provided tonight. So I look forward to the conversation.
All right, and if you want to remain on the line, of course, to stick with us, you can. Let's go to Ron Devon Prospect. Give him some final words. We appreciate you, brother, as well. Go ahead.
All right. I want to say thank you, South Showtime and Mayana, for actually hosting this segment. I want to thank Vocab for being willing to answer these direct line of questioning. I appreciate his attempt to bring clarity to the Christian community in regards to his personal experience regarding the Hebrew Israelite community. I'm a little bothered because a lot of the rhetoric that is conveyed in his conclusion sounds very crusade-esque. And it seems like he wants to equip the Christian community to actually defend against what he says or expose the false teachings of the Hebrew Israelite community. I believe that is a very subjective statement that he makes there from his worldview. And from the opposite end, or the opposing end, we would see it the same way. We would see what he's doing as an attack against our community and the things that we've established and the things that we are attempting to accomplish. I would like to give some advice to Vocab for him to be a little bit more unbiased in regards to looking for the good in our community, because it does exist, and being able to appreciate a lot of the work that we are doing, have done, and will continue to do for our community and for those who are around us in regards to improving the conditions of the societal ills that we face each and every day in our various communities. So, Vocab, we thank you for being on the show. I look forward to hearing what the audience will say to you. Again, like I said, I look forward to any additional material that you write on this subject matter so that way it can be peer-reviewed and critiqued. And I would say, hey, do what you came out here to do, to accomplish whatever you have to accomplish. I'll also have to yield back to what Onleilove has said, that if certain things is not of Yah, as we see in the book of Acts, that it will not come to pass and it will not flourish. But we see that there are adherents to what you coin as Hebrew Israelism that is expanding profoundly all over the world, not just the U.S. And we're doing a lot of positive things to impact the people that are around us, and even taking the obligation, the same way that Yahushua, if he was here, would do, to serve the community the best that we can, so that way they can be the best who they can be, and that they can all be adherents to the salvation that he brings to them. Shalom.
All right, we appreciate you. And let's go to, let me give Mayana some, 5 minutes as well. And of course, she's going to remain with us as the co-host for the show, but I'm going to give her 5 minutes to say her piece. And once we go to the questioning process, defer to the people, we're going to go down the line. We want those people that read the book, preferably, and our vocab's going to answer as much questions as possible. And being that Mayana read the entire book, she's going to pretty much help as far as saying whether a person read the book or not. But let's go to Mayana. So 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I want to join the brothers and sisters who thanked and extended their appreciation for the author coming on and having a conversation with us and giving us clarity in spaces that we have asked for it. Again, it was very brave. It was very open. Like Emunah said, the transparency is appreciated. I wanted to, in my conclusion, I guess kind of wrap up. I won't be able to really ask for an answer to some of these things, but I am completely open to having a conversation at another time or even in the comments about some of the points I'm going to bring up so that the people can talk about this as well. One of the things that we were talking about was primary sources, and I found that there was a portion in the book where a text is some unknown. I wrote this down. It's his key informants are cloaked in anonymity. For example, some unnamed prison chaplain provides him with faith statistics that are non-specific that indicate an unsubstantiated displacement of Islam by Israelites by some unknown margin. Who is this chaplain and how can we verify this source? So we have all of this kind of allusions to facts and statistics that we don't have. And then we see, for example, there is a nod to a personal colleague that he says that he's indebted to for these historical evidences or historical positions, but this is a personal colleague versus someone like Jacob S. Dorman, who actually wrote a very comprehensive, because I've read the book Chosen People, I've read the description, I've spoken to Dr. John L. Jackson because he's in my discipline. And so to say that you would have to depend on someone other than these people who have done the work, John L. Jackson has actually been in these spaces that the author is saying that he could not access. So it's very interesting to note this idea that there's this inaccessibility that we are being told to, the purpose of this seems to be to cloak us in mystery so that we seem more dangerous. This is very Birth of a Nation-esque kind of, you have to go and protect, especially the way he reimagines the placement of the European woman in Barry. We see there's this idea of protecting the white female space, the so-called white female space. It's also interesting that there's an exception to the word white used there. He says that's a word that we use. Apparently he would not use it. He does consistently use Caucasian instead. So it's interesting that there's a reluctance to use white for Europeans, but an urgency to use black when it comes to us. This list of One Westers, ISUPK has been very vocal about the fact that there is nobody beside them. ISUPK is One West and nobody else. And you can go, there's not one video you will ever go to ever where they're saying ISUPK and our affiliates in our satellite communities are also ISUPK. There's only One West. So, okay, I have 2 minutes. Okay. Other than that, in that long, long list of people, we have our sister Huldah. He lists Huldah, who is not a congregation. She's a woman who, all by her onesies, is on a YouTube channel. So I really don't understand what looks like a hit list and it has a woman on it who's doing absolutely nothing but going over Hebrew. And his final, one of his other major concerns was that Israelites are taking young melanated men away from Jesus, which is very interesting since most of the camps that he's concerned with are messianic and are all day long talking about the New Testament Messiah, very specifically the New Testament Messiah. So all of these young people are coming to the Jesus that he's saying are being guided away from in some it's very confusing because they're necessarily talking very much about this Messiah and not leaving the Messiah. They have left white evangelical churches. They have left white spaces, but they have not left their faith and commitment to the New Testament. So I think that's also misleading. Bringing out this kind of information, including women, there's so many things that are problematic and disturbing for me that I wanted to be able to get some clarity on. I'm hoping that he'll be able to maybe respond to some of these concerns in the comment section, because in closing, the idea is that while all of this conversation is happening between men, there are women and there are children behind these movements. So approaching a woman or a child with this very jaded position has other consequences. So this is why I wanted to know if truth was important, if responsibility and accountability was going to be important, because we have children and there are women that have to walk these streets. I yield.
All right. Once again, that number to call in is 319-527-6239. Of course, before we go to the audience out there, I'm going to give Vocab 5 minutes, and after that, we're going to go to the audience. We got to go to the audience out there. It's 10:22 right now, and we only have possibly, hopefully, up to 11 o'clock, and, Blog Talk Radio. So let's go to Vocab. Give him 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Right. I wonder if the last questioner has read the book, because on page 123, I review the book by Jacob Dorman, Chosen People. I review the book. So I did utilize it, and I even mentioned it with a review. So it was not something I excluded from my matrix of sources. The challenge is that it only mentions One West a tad, and since the book is about One West, some of the information was relevant, some of the information was not relevant. So it wasn't utilized maybe as heavy as she thought it should have been. That's because it's not about One West. But I review the book on page 123. This thing about I don't like the term white or something, I would like to have a page reference for that. I am not sure what she is referring to at all. And also, when I'm talking about saving the white woman, I was referring to One Westers who are on comment boards speaking about the Barry movie, not my position. I was talking about One Westers who were denigrating the scene with young Obama in it because they're saying, look at him caping, which means to step in and save the white woman. So that's what I was referring to, not my own views that was what was happening. That was some kind of good thing. So that's another mistake in understanding the book that I think is fairly clear, as well as a possible error where somehow I bristle at the term white. I don't know where that page would be. And then also, the folks who are, quote, leaving the church, they're not leaving white evangelical spaces. They're leaving the traditional historical black church. So that seems a mistake as well. And I'm just trying to understand that whole thing, because there's a lot of false assumptions and perhaps even a lot of misinformation. I think it might be accidental. Maybe there could be clarity if we had a chance to further talk. But those are the things I wanted to bring out with what the last questioner said. With that, I'm ready and willing to take calls and answer questions.
All right. Like I said, we got to go to the audience out there. Of course, we're unable to address every single question, at this time. Maybe in the future, in the long run, we'll have another one with you and Mayana, or behind the scenes. Pretty much, we can get some more clarity. But we got to go to the audience out there. We got to go to the audience for the first-time listeners out there. There's no foul language. Got to keep it clean, keep it professional, and preferably you want to talk to the people that actually read the book or went to the free link that we posted up for weeks now to read a few pages from the book Barack Obama versus Black Hebrew Israelites. I'm going to have my co-host Mayana, who read the book entirely, join me in this process in order to see who read the book or not. But of course, Vocab also has the option. If he wants to answer certain questions, he can. It's up to him. But let's go to the phone lines right now. Let's go to 504-485. You're live in there.
How you doing, Sal? Good show. I want to give shouts out to the sister Mayana, sister Emunah, and other sister that was on the line. Hope she get better. Congratulations to Brother Divine on his Scholar of the Year award. Definitely deserved it. And I also want to thank Vocab Malone for putting 2 free chapters online so we can read. I definitely recommend that everybody listening go buy a book. but definitely the book I recommend is My Brother's Keeper or Brother's Keeper by Sister Emunah. I do have a question for Vocab. What was your intended genre for this book?
Popular level, general audience apologetics.
Okay. And is it true that you're the master teacher, according to G-Man of the Shield Squad?
Master teacher? I don't think G-Man ever said that about me.
Those are quoted words from him.
G-Man likes to. If G-Man said that, I mean, G-Man has a gift of gab, man. So if you said that, sorry, that cracks me up. Yeah, I'm not a master teacher. I mean, LaRon and So Real, for example, and Cherry, they were doing this way before me. Abu and Shield Squad, who is the closest thing I have to a co-author on the book, maybe he can come on later, guided me in tons of matters, although I take final responsibility for the product. So I'm no master teacher of anyone. I call LaRon when I have a question about all kinds of things. I call Abu when I have a question about all kinds of things. I call them. They don't call me needing answers. It doesn't work that way. I think G-Man just sees that as a specialty or role of mine, and he's kind of like Barnabas. He's an encouraging brother, you know.
Okay. I have one last question. Then I want to just kind of review what I've read, and I also will read a quote from your book. But my last question for you is, what is your discrepancy with Israelites? Is it our doctrine or is it our ethnicity?
Yeah, the doctrine is what I focus on in the book, and the doctrine is the problem, because the doctrine relates to belief and practice. And what we believe and practice defines us as followers of Christ or not. And those who heed his words, he says, receive eternal life, and those who do not are condemned already. So it's the doctrine.
Oh. Okay. Well, after reading the 2 free chapters that was online, it is my opinion that the book is highly subjective, it's contentious, and like the panel said, it's broad sweeping. You use sensitive and inflammatory words. You refuse to even acknowledge the position that we have, and you bring forth false narratives and logical fallacies. And like most Western propaganda, it's very misleading and sophomoric in its dispensation to its audience. Also, I feel I can speak for a majority of Israelites out there. We reject the term Hebrew Israelism, the way that you bring it forth and the way that you say it's coined by James White. And I feel it's very, I don't know how to say, but when you admit to being deceptive, to using false premises to sell the book, I feel that's kind of, I'm sorry?
Did you say I admitted to being deceptive?
Yeah, when you say...
Yeah, that's incorrect. I most certainly did not admit to being deceptive. What are you referring to?
No, when from the title of your book, you say...
Yeah, it's not deceptive. It's explained what the back of the book, as well as the page 1 on the introduction, explains exactly what it means. It's explicit what it means, and I have follow-up videos where I explain it even further. But this idea of Hebrew Israelism, just so the caller knows, there's a precedent for that. It wasn't designed or designated first for one Westers or those who would have some similar beliefs. It first came about with a parallel, an analog, and something that was prior to Hebrew Israelism of the One West or Chicago variety, which was British Anglo-Israelism. Nobody agreed except for themselves that they were Israelites, so nobody was going to call them Anglo-Israelites. That's why they were, as far as understanding them to be accurate, that's why the phrase Anglo-Israelism was used. And a lot of the same arguments that they use, One West used, they just reversed them. And so it's not like it was designed just for One West Hebrew Israelism. It already existed for a prior movement. That was just something Europeans did. Does that help at all with the...
I apologize. It's 10:31, so we got to get some more of these callers. Again, family, that number to call in is 319-527-6239. If you're already on the phone line, simply press number 1. press number 1. That let me know that you have a question. If you didn't press number 1, then I'm not going to be able to see you. You have to press number 1 if you have a question or a comment. All right, so we got to go to the next caller. Let's go to 832-530. You're live in there.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, what's going on?
I was calling to ask a question to Mr. Malone concerning your book. I'm noticing that it's a lot of attacks concerning the quote-unquote Black Hebrew Israelites. My question to you, sir, is there any other, have you done any other studies on other ethnicities? Because Black people are not the only ones in the Hebrew movement. So if you say it's not about ethnicities, why are you doing it specifically on Black Hebrew Israelites, not just that particular religion? Because actually, with me just coming to this walk, I didn't come to this walk through Black Hebrew Israelites. I actually came through, for the most part, a white Messianic congregation. So my question to you is, it's not about race or color. Why are you only dealing with Black Hebrews?
Okay. Yeah, good question. The only time I use the phrase Black Hebrew Israelite is in the title of the book or when I explain the title of the book. The whole rest of the book, I don't use that phrase. It's only in those places so people understand what I'm talking about, and then I immediately drop it for the rest of the book. And so it's only used in those places. And you said it's not about race, but One Westers would disagree with you, and One Westers are who I'm talking about. They basically share the same ideology as Richard Spencer, the white nationalist, who basically says your race is your religion. And there's a similar mentality among the One West version of Hebrew Israelism, and that's the primary focus of my book. But if you read through it, the main thing I focus on are the beliefs or the claims in relationship to theology, such as the definition of the gospel, or who's excluded or who's included, things like that. So it really has to do with those, because they're messing with what the gospel is, and that's a problem.
All right, like I said, we went out of time, so I got to get to some more of these callers. Again, that number is 319-527-6239. I apologize. I have to go to the next caller, though. Let's go to 718-378. You're live on air.
Oh, shalom. Shalom. All praise to the Most High. Can everybody hear me?
It's your loud and clear, Imam.
Okay. This is Emunah Ami Batlewi from New York. I confess that I didn't read either the book or see the movie. So I'm actually asking this question based on someone who is sort of new, hearing it fresh and just listening to the quotes on both sides and the comments on both sides. I actually have a two-part question. What happens to people who haven't seen the movie or who have no clue that what is being parodied in the book reflects the movie or vice versa? That's one. And number two, having worked as a research analyst and understanding how research is properly conducted, I'm just curious as to why this particular author, Mr. Malone, did not actually interview some of the people that he is quoting to have had experience with in the book. I confess that I haven't read the book. I'm just listening to the comments that go back and forth, and it seems that you did not actually interview some of these people.
All right, I can answer the question.
Stand by, Vocab. Let her complete it. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, she didn't read the book, so.
She's almost done. Yeah, she's almost done.
Yeah, I'm confessing that I didn't read it. I'm just listening to the general questions that go out. And so, therefore, I'm asking, if these questions have come forth to you, why you didn't, as it was stated, and you seem to answer that you had only talked about two people that you interviewed, but hadn't talked about the rest of the people that you're quoting in your book, or that you say that you're quoting in your book. And I just was curious about it. That's it's not a denigration to you. It's just curiosity.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay. You have the option to pass. If you don't want to, it's up to you.
I'll answer. I interviewed. If you mean interview in the sense of spoke with, I spoke with way more than 2 people. So yeah, I talked to a lot of people, a whole lot of Hebrew Israelites, multiple times, multiple levels of leadership. And as far as the movie, they could just read the parts of the script that I have in the book. They could watch the accompanying videos on my website, vocabmalone.com, where I show the clip multiple times and break it down. Go on YouTube and see where the clips are as well. And there's even clips where Hebrew Israelites analyze the clips. These clips came to my attention from Hebrew Israelites. They said, hey, check this out. Barack Obama interacts with Hebrew. They didn't use interact, but interacts with Hebrew Israelites in this movie, right? And so that's how it came to my attention. So they could do that. So all that's available, as well as a full discussion of it in the book. So I try to lay it out so a person would not be in the dark at all.
Yeah, let me just bring my co-host in, Mayana. Anything you want to say, a few words before we go to the next person? Yeah, you can say a few words.
No. I want us to keep moving. We seem to have a great deal of interest out there. I will weigh in maybe if I get another opportunity.
All right, let's go to the people. Let's go to 651-387. You're live in there.
Much long call. How y'all doing?
Pretty good.
I think I missed it. When you were talking about in your book, you keep talking about Hebrew Israelism, or however how you say that. When you first started, you call yourself an urban apologetic. So you're talking about dealing with black folks, right? In general, like the black church.
No, it's the context is the city.
The city.
Yeah.
So urban means the city. Okay. So you're not talking about a demographic of people.
Well, the city has its own. Each city has its own distinct demographics, of course.
Well, the term urban is designated to a people, isn't it?
It doesn't have to be. No.
Well, if you call yourself an urban apologetics, that's not. Why would you need to designate that term? I'm just, in general, I'm trying to figure out. You designating this term.
I have an answer. Yeah.
But you're not.
Here's why. Because the issues dealt with in sort of the city context are not identical to the issues that are dealt with in academia or in suburbia or in
exactly what you mean by what you're saying.
Or in mainstream America. The issues are distinct. For example, most white Christians walking around have never had someone say, "Why do you follow that religion when it's got a white Jesus in it?" Now, of course, that presumption in the question is false. Jesus is just not white, but that's a question that would get asked in certain contexts, say by a Nation of Islam member to somebody who attends church regularly, something like that. The context is different, and so there needs to be answers in those contexts. And Hebrew Israelism is one of the issues, but there's others, Kemetic, Egyptology, science, Moorish. I mean, you can go down this list, and there's a lot of issues that are distinct that really a lot of times get overlooked because they're context sensitive, and a lot of times people aren't paying attention to that context like they should.
Okay, well, that's my point. What's the sensitivity of the context you're talking about is urban apologetics. Come on, you got Urban Dictionary. That's not talking about just general city people. It's talking about a people. It's just code for saying black folks, right?
Well, so my friend Chris Brooks, who ministers out there in Detroit, he has a great book, which I reference in my book, called Urban Apologetics. And listen carefully, it has an awesome subtitle, which really explains it. It says, "Why the Gospel is Good News for the City." So he doesn't say just why the gospel is good news for black folks. He says why the gospel is good news for the city. And check out his chapter titles. Christ in the City. Is the Christian message still relevant? Christ in Apologetics and Evangelism, the two-sided coin. Christ in Morality, Ethics. Christ in Life, Abortion. Christ in Sexuality. Christ in the Family. Christ in Religious Pluralism. Christ in Social Justice. Christ in the role of urban apologetics in the local church. And lastly, other urban religions. He has a chapter. He has an appendix on that as well. So you see, some of the issues overlap, but even where they do overlap, they're sort of dealt with in a different way because of the context of the city and whoever is in the city.
All right, we have to move on. We have like 18 minutes in the air, family. You have 18 minutes in the air. So, again, we're trying to get as much of the callers as possible. That number to call in is 319-527-6239.
Oh,
let's
that brother.
Next. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
I hear you.
Okay. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next caller. Let's go to, let's go to 917-940. You're live in there.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you. This is Abu Khabar.
Oh, hey, Abu. So,
yes.
Everybody, this is the person I said that if there is a closest thing I had to co-author in certain parts of the book, it's him, and that's why I would never think of myself as some master teacher, because when I have a question, he's one of the people that I call, and he's the most knowledgeable person I know on the history of Hebrew Israelism, specifically One West, which is what's the book focus. And so I was hoping he could call at some point. So there he is, Brother Sal. That's Abu right there.
Hi, Abu.
Hey,
Good evening. Just two quick comments, if I may, and I don't know if anything, there'll be any responses. One of the panelists brought up asserted, and forgive me, maybe assertion is not the right word, but offered the perspective that SUPK is the only One West group or the only representative of One West. I would wanted to clarify that the way One West is used is as a reference to the groups that are splinters from One West, and the ISUPK I would consider a splinter group from it, because the history of it is such that the ICUPK, the original ICUPK that was at 1 West 125th Street and then 1941 Madison and then became the ICGJC, Mayana, the leader of what's now the ISUPK, there's differing statements as to what exactly happened, whether he was pushed out or he left on his own, but basically the group turned into the ICGJC, and then he stepped out of that and reestablished a new group with the old name. So in a sense, the ISUPK is also a splinter group of this One West spectrum. So the One West spectrum refers to all these groups that sort of descend from One West. And I think this is acknowledged, while of course some of the groups will not be very ecumenical in their approach to one another. You see this with GMS and you see it to a lesser degree with ISUPK. Nonetheless, I think there's still some acknowledgement of this insofar that, for example, I don't recall if it was Baba TV or Son Netter's show, but something to that effect. These shows kind of overlap. The gentleman who leads the Sakari group was on that show. He visited New York, and he stood next to Tazariak, and he said, "We all come out of One West," and Tazariak nodded, because there is this acknowledgement of these different groups splintering off and then continuing to splinter again and again. But I just want to clarify that. Sorry, sir.
Abu, you also give everyone a real quick example how within socio-religious studies, using a noun in this way and turning it into a descriptor of the adherents' belief system is actually, there's a precedent for it, especially within Judaism. Could you explain what I mean by that within socio-religious studies?
Well, yeah, certainly. In terms of like when we use the phrase One Wester, that putting that ER at the end of this neologism or of a noun, you see that certainly with Hasidic groups, where you had the one Hasidic group that started under, let's say, the Baal Shem Tov, and then his different students and his students' started creating different schools that began to oppose one another. And now the different Hasidic groups, you have one that's, say, from Satu Mare in Romania might be referred to as Satmar or Satmars. The ones that are from Lubavitch or Lubavitch in, I guess, Belarus, they're called Lubavitchers. They're the ones that dominate Crown Heights, and so on down the line like that. So you get this, that's where the ER, that's the example I could come up with in terms of Judaism.
So it's based on the place name where the movement arose. Just to clarify.
Yeah, stand by. Let me bring my co-host in. Co-host, Mayana, anything you want to say at this time? Want to address anything?
Absolutely. I now, Abu knows that I have a great deal of respect for him in other spaces. They have a group that I've been a part of, and I don't have any disrespect towards him. However, I do take exception to the idea that anyone other than ISUPK has the naming privileges to decide who has a parent-child relationship in terms of who descends from them. The way this is being represented is that these outliers, these people who are crafting a narrative, have naming privileges instead of ISUPK, who is on record as saying that they do not acknowledge any of these groups as ISUPK. One West is the address of ISUPK, and if they say GMS is not a quote One Wester, which is a term I don't know where it came from, but if they're saying they're not One West, I think that it's a bit arrogant, and there's a position of privilege that is being displayed here to say, well, I get to usurp the way you self-identify. You don't get to have that decision. Toby is what I hear every time I hear them insist that all of these people are One West, when One West has said none of those people are One West. And for every Messianic to fall under this One West banner in the way that I'm sure that I can't call any of these people Catholic, because just because they come and they later splinter, they reform and they protest and they do all these other things, they don't want to be called Catholic simply because they have a particular origin. The fact that there's a difference and split in doctrine is why they get to be individuals, peoples, and not be called Catholic. The author specifically in the previous interview, when Emunah asked him, how do you get to make this assertion about your identity, he specifically said it's not because of the Vatican. It's not because of the Catholic Church. Why do you get to do that? Whatever denomination you claim now, at some point has some relationship to the Catholic Church. It's very interesting to me that these people get to have power over definitions, and we do not. We do not have power over our own definitions.
Okay, let him answer the question. Okay, good answer.
If I may, I think I understand the concern there. Nonetheless, I think using this phrase, before there was the phrase One Wester, the phrase that used to be used was UPKer, and the motivation, it's not so much to tell people how they're going to identify, but nonetheless to attempt to identify this very specific stream. And it's not just us that use this now. I mean, you'll see lots of what we would call non-One West Israelite groups refer to these different camps as One West groups, to sort of understand that spectrum or that stream of the splinter groups. With regards to the claim that with regards to the idea of ISUPK being One West and One West being their address, the thing is they themselves don't control One West. Nobody controls One West. The ICUPK moved to 1941 Madison, and then it was after that point, as I understand it, that Johanna either broke off or got pushed out. That's around the time the ascendancy of Tzaddakia. But the thing is, so none of them control One West now, the actual physical address. It's I think recently they were saying it was Applebee's or something.
It's an abandoned Applebee's now. It's for sale.
Yeah. But another point to make, though, is the history of the new ISUPK, of Johanna's group, also has to sort of be understood, is that they reestablished this name ISUPK. They rode with the evolution into ICUPK, and then as it began to transition into the ICGJC, and then there was a split. So they were, at least Johanna, he sort of breaks off from that. And the thing is, with that in mind, he wouldn't be the only one that has a right to the title, because obviously the ICGJC for about, now it's been almost a decade, or maybe it's been more of a decade, but they had their famous DVD, or infamous DVD, titled Purge Out the Rebels, where they claimed the mantle of One West and described all the other groups as quote-unquote antichrist based on 1 John 2 for breaking off from them. And so the only reason I bring that up is just to say that they're not the only ones who can claim the group. Obviously, there's other people that stretch back to the school that was at One West.
Right.
Yo, sorry.
The reason why...
we got like 9 minutes left. Vocab will let you respond, and after that, I'm going to let Mayana respond after. And the reason why that's done
is actually, interestingly enough, when we first began this and just said Hebrew Israelites, the complaints were multiple and frequent, where everyone said, you need to make sure you specify who you're speaking about. Otherwise, everybody thinks it's everybody who affiliates that way. So then, as a more careful designation, we begin employing One West more frequently as a result to be more precise. And now there's a complaint about that. So there is no way to win when talking about this, but One West is something that the groups themselves acknowledge, and Nathaniel talks about the school and believes that the other groups have gone off, even though he's willing to work with he'll give them public acknowledgement, but behind the scenes it's quite different. Same thing with GMS, who frequently talks about the school. Tahar and Onleilove and other men go back to the school as well. And so they're not just people who picked up the teachings. They were there during the school's days when it actually was One West. So we're not using this in error. This is something that they themselves as well adopt. ISUPK is just the strongest adopter of it, and they probably are most true in line with the school, although ICGJC actually is the only one that has 2 of the heads left, Aria, and I forgot the other man's name right now off the top of my head, but they actually have 2 of the original 7 heads left in ICGJC, but they've deviated so far from One West. It's quite a bizarre picture about their true trajectory and origin. But nonetheless, we're just adopting language that was already in existence by the groups themselves, and partially was done in request by other Hebrew Israelites who said, it feels like you're labeling all of us that way. Now we designate it, and you're saying it's a Toby move. That seems over the top, to say the least.
All right, we kind of have 7 minutes left. Mayana, you can respond. We got to get to 1 or 2 more callers. Okay.
Okay, so I did a quick poll of the people to ask if any of them would identify me as a One Wester. I live in Brooklyn. I've been in New York for most of my life, and I've been an Israelite for over 25 years. And I have been to One West when ISUPK was there. And funnily enough, not one person in all of Israel that is watching here or is on all the other social media platforms would call me a One Wester just because I sat in a chair at One West in 1994. I think it was. So nobody thinks this way. Everyone else is very sensitive to the different ways, the texture of the differences in the way that we approach Israel, except for the outsider. The outsider sees everything as in this type of polarity where categories are very easy to do. But no one on the inside would do that because we understand that the things are not that simple. And you cannot you cannot say there's one thing and then you said that you were being more detailed, but you categorized 23 other camps, Knesset, and congregations under One West who would not agree that they are under One West or have any, or do not have significant commonalities with ISUPK to be considered that way. And to utterly reject Israel telling you this is not One West, for you to say, I have made this category, you must accept it, and you're talking about us. We're telling you that's not true. We talked earlier about sincerity and integrity and the truth. If you were interested in the truth, then you would say, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I shouldn't put 23 people under One West when they're clearly telling us that's not where we belong. I don't understand the resistance to our voices when we're telling you that's not who we are.
All right, we got to go to the next call. We got like 5 minutes left in the air. Listen, we might go into the overtime portion, but after that, we're going to briefly wrap up. So, again, if you're on the phone lines, once that time runs out, well, no, if you're on the internet, and if the time runs out, the only way you can hear the rest of the show live is by calling in. You're going to have to call in before the time runs out. That number is 319-527-6239. However, if you miss it, you have to go to the podcast, iTunes podcast, check out the show, go to Blog Talk Radio, check out the archives, and, of course, it's going to be on the YouTube later on. So, again, it's the iTunes and the podcast section. Type in the search box, Debate Talk for You, subscribe, and go to YouTube and Blog Talk and check out the archives. Let's go to the next caller, though. Let's see. Let's go to 773-640. Live in air.
Hey, shalom. Yeah, this brother Mikael calling out of Chicago. I listened to the whole entire show. I like to say it was a very interesting show. To my sisters, they did a very good job cross-examining vocab. Y'all some lionesses, and my little brother, Ron Divine Prospect. He has you shivering a little bit. And so I know I ain't got that much time, so I got to do this real fast. If you can do it later. Answer 2 questions, and I got a statement. And it's based off your book. It's strictly off your book. On page 17, now earlier somebody called in and they asked you, they said, was your book more directed at, was your issue with the doctrine of the Hebrew Israelite community as a whole, which we know it varies, And they said, or is it the ethnicity of us claiming to be the true Hebrew Israelites? You said it was a doctrine, which we know is impossible because we almost all have different doctrines. So I'll read this from page 17. It goes on to say, here's one big difference between, and this is the brother from IOG that was spoken of earlier. Here's one difference between the Harlem-originated One Westers and Chicago-originated Hebrew Israelites. The Israel of God member would never call a white woman a cave blankety blank. In fact, probably wouldn't even be on the street preaching, which is false. As far as the street preaching, this does not mean they are small. On the contrary, Israel of God Chicago building holds 6,000 people. No other Hebrew Israelite group I know has a building that size. There are a number of Hebrew Israelite groups associated with Chicago. There you go. Scoop down. Hebrew Israelite groups out of One West and Harlem do not believe other nations can be grafted into Israel proper. In short, they can only be enemies, never brothers. Israel of God is different. Their theology still includes ethnic hierarchy. They call it the protocol, but it is a softer and gentler ethnic hierarchy. So again, it seems, according to your book, that your goal is not the doctrine, it is the ethnicity, because we say that only the Negro is the real Israelite. Therefore, we are the only ones that can teach the word of God. And so I just like to I made that statement, and I'd like to ask you, can you answer this question whenever you get a chance? According to Isaiah chapter 44, because I haven't heard the word of God spoken at all, and this is a book about God, Isaiah chapter 44, verse 4 and 5, it says that the Israelites would spring up and they would surname themselves after Israel, meaning that they lost their identity. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 26 said that he would scatter them to all four corners and cause their name to cease from among men. I'd like to ask you, when did this ever happen to the Jewish people that y'all recognize as Jews in Israel? When did they ever lose their identity? After that, I say peace.
Yeah, so having a problem with the ethnic hierarchy is a theological matter. It's not the claim to be Israelites. It's the practice that results in. And I would go to a key text of Galatians chapter 2 to demonstrate exactly what I mean, starting in verse 11, but the preceding 10 verses are very important. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with them, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that their conduct, here's the key reason why I wanted to read this. When I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? Verse 14 of chapter 2 of Galatians is the answer to the question. The conduct hierarchy is not in step with the truth of the gospel. And the second question has nothing to do with the book, so I'm not going to answer it at this time.
All right, we got to pretty much wrap it up. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Mayana, open some words. And by the way, tomorrow we have the hot seat segment on Debate Talk Radio. We're going to have Garfield Reed here in the hot seat. That's the show where the audience can call in and they have 60 minutes or more to ask their questions to Garfield Reed. You know, he's part of the Dagger Squad, and call in with your questions. But Mayana, any words you want to say before we get out of here? Yeah.
I just want to say, again, thank you for coming. And I'll repeat what I'm saying on the live stream to the author directly. The purpose of me wanting to have a conversation with you is that perhaps for you to bethink yourself a bit and to remember that there are women and children behind these things. And the way the book reads, it reads less like an introduction and more like a call to arms. And there's a lot of negative energy in it that maybe I will give you the benefit of doubt that is not intentional, but it can be read into it. It can be read into it because of the type of language that it's in, because it's allowed to live in a fictional setting, because there's so much creative license allowed in it. And I'm just asking you to be considerate of the fact that we are not talking about fictional people. We're talking about real women, real children that have to be confronted, as you said, with all of these encounters. It's not going to be just between you men. And to be mindful of that, because real violence comes behind people feeling zealous about their faith. So that's really, I want to say at the end of the day, my word to you, to perhaps in the next larger working, to be a bit more considerate of these other potential repercussions. Zehu.
All right, shalom. That's my sister Mayana. We appreciate you coming on, and everybody on the panel that joined us. Onleilove, Emunah, Ronavon Prospect, and once again, sorry I couldn't be here, but hopefully he's listening to the show later on. And we appreciate everybody that joined us, and of course all the callers out there that participated, asked their questions. All right, let's go to vocab and get some final words. Wrap up. Let's go. That.
Yeah, the characterization of this as a call to arms seems off base, and I have a reference. I don't know if she has a reference where she would demonstrate why she thought that, but I do have a reference, which is the end of the book, where you would put something like this. And if I could read it so people could see, it's not a call to arms, it's a call to apologetic engagement. And these last two paragraphs, I think, demonstrate that. Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to put an end to this famine of resources. The Spirit will empower Christ's people for the task. Will we be vigilant and obedient, or we will wilt away into the shadows of complacency and irrelevancy? God forbid. Consider this an urgent invitation for God's people to begin standing in the gap. Upload the videos, write the articles, conduct the interviews, record the podcasts, publish the books, craft the PowerPoints, and give the lectures now. Let us pray for men and women who are called to study this trend, learn how to explain it to others, and then passionately teach others how to refute the doctrines of Hebrew Israelism. Love compels the Christian apologist to protect and prepare the vulnerable. Love compels us to become adept at giving practical answers to the questions Hebrew Israelites ask. For far too long, there's been a lack of attention paid to issues relating to urban apologetics. The time is now for deep, vibrant, and active Christian love to change the narrative and watch the Lord transform our cities for God's glory. Soli Deo Gloria, Vocab Malone.